Did you know? San Andreas' 3 cities closely reference 3 real-life cities in the western United States. Los Santos, meaning the Saints, takes the place of Los Angeles, San Fierro replaces San Francisco, and Las Venturas replaces Las Vegas. The state is named after the San Andreas Fault, a crack in the Earth's crust where 2 tectonic plates meet. Appropriately, the San Andreas Fault is located roughly in the middle of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Las Vegas. Rockstar also took inspiration from their home country of Scotland. The Garver and Kincaid bridges are based on the Forth Road Bridge and the Forth Rail Bridge, respectively, which link Edinburgh to Fife. Geography aside, San Andreas also takes inspiration from media and world events for its setting and characters. According to co-writer and Rockstar Games co-founder Dan Houser, the game's comedy came from a dry British sense of humor, with the 6 writers constantly wanting to push boundaries. Its satire was leveled at the broader weirdness of American culture, action movies, and consumerism. As Dan Houser said, "They're all British and looking at America from the same perspective." The game alludes to the film Menace to Society multiple times, including a Grove Street gang member who's modeled after the character O-Dog. In the game's second mission, an employee at a pizza restaurant says,
"I feel sorry for your dad."
This is a nod to a line in the movie.
"I feel sorry for your mother."
Actor Clifton Powell played both Big Smoke in San Andreas and Chauncey in Menace to Society. Additionally, the character Alan Crawford is fashioned after the character Trey Styles from Boys in the Hood. Both Menace to Society and Boys in the Hood were released in 1992, the year the game is set. In keeping with its satirical tone, part of the game's narrative alludes to real events. The real-world LAPD Rampart scandal saw many members of the Crash anti-gang unit involved in misconduct. This created false arrests, excessive force, perjury, and planting false evidence. It was one of the largest cases of police corruption in American history, with numerous cases remaining unsolved. In San Andreas, Officer Tenpenny blackmails CJ into working with Crash and is shown to be corrupt throughout. Tenpenny's acquittal and the resulting riots in Los Santos parallel the 1992 LA riots. In 1991, taxi driver Rodney King was beaten by 4 officers wielding nightsticks. Despite video evidence, the officers were acquitted of all charges in 1992. This led to riots across the city, with more than 2,000 injured and over 50 killed. Rockstar didn't shy away from uncomfortable subject matter, including open criticism of their competition. During the mission Mad Dog's Rhymes, a guard remarks,
"How can we fracture mess up so bad? Tanner, you suck ass!"
This is a dig at Driver 3, a game by Reflections Interactive considered by many to be an inferior clone of GTA. There are billboards in the game that read, "Get rid of old rubbish fast. True Grime, Street Cleaners," referencing the 2003 action game True Crime, Streets of LA. Another parody can be seen with the bulletproof glass Max Payne, a nod to Max Payne. A hidden Easter egg can be found in Area 69, a thinly veiled parody of Area 51, which is often the subject of alien conspiracy theories. By using cheats, the player can find a normally inaccessible part of the facility with a crowbar lying on a table. This is a reference to the game Half-Life, which also took place in a facility associated with extraterrestrial activity. Half-Life's protagonist Gordon Freeman wields a crowbar. Despite their seemingly disrespectful attitude towards other titles, Rockstar were inspired by many games. They adopted a magpie mentality, taking what they liked from other games and putting them in San Andreas. The team was impressed by the open space in Smuggler's Run, for example, and incorporated similar technology into driving through the countryside. When prompted about a morality system during an interview, Dan Houser replied that it's left up to player choice. Outside of some main story missions, players can be moral or immoral by choice, rather than having morality imposed on them by the game. Rockstar references other games in the GTA series as well. The Jack, Queen, and King cards in video poker feature characters from both GTA 3 and Vice City. Claude and Catalina also make a cameo in the mission Farewell My Love. They move to Liberty City after the mission, leading to the events of GTA 3. The mission St. Mark's Bistro sees CJ return to Liberty City, though the only playable location is St. Mark's Bistro. Despite this, a large part of the city has been modeled, but without collision programming. Using a cheat device and a jetpack to avoid falling through the floor, the player can move outside the bistro. The mission Body Harvest takes its title from the Nintendo 64 game of the same name, created by Rockstar North back when they were called DMA Design. The game paved the way for GTA's success on the PlayStation 2 in a number of ways. It was the company's first 3D outing and ended up driving them to develop for the PS2. Nintendo was slated to publish the game, but was unhappy with its violent content. Supposedly, Shigeru Miyamoto wanted less gore and more puzzles. Nintendo eventually dropped the project, splintering the two companies and leading DMA to seek a new publisher. San Andreas has a handful of original Easter eggs. Climbing the south tower of the Gant Bridge will reveal a sign that reads, "There are no Easter eggs up here. Go away." The Visitor Center lists in-game facts about the bridge, such as the fact that it has 11 textures and takes up 1.27 megabytes of disk space. Failing the mission Running Dog while CJ is overweight results in unique dialogue with Big Smoke. He advises CJ to go to the gym and lose some weight. The player also can't initiate missions involving the jetpack if CJ is too heavy. Collecting all 50 oysters grants many boons, one of which allows the player to date any potential girlfriends regardless of sex appeal. This is a reference to the supposed aphrodisiac effects of oysters. Rumors have persisted for years that Bigfoot can be found in the game. Numerous supposed sightings exist, the authenticity of which are often contested. The release of the PC version made mods widely available, complicating matters even further. For their part, Rockstar have been evasive about the subject, sometimes outright denying Bigfoot's existence, and sometimes being antagonistically coy. The Japanese release of San Andreas was published by Capcom. The game received a Z rating from Japan's CERO Video Games Rating Board, which means players had to be 18 or over to legally purchase the game. Even with this age gate, the Japanese version was still censored. In January 2007, Capcom announced several changes to the game. This included pedestrians not dropping money when killed, and players were now unable to hit a character if the character was already dead. Missions containing explicit sexual acts or murder were also censored or removed entirely. As well as regional changes, there are also several differences between the PC and console versions of the game. When having prostitutes in a vehicle, the console versions keep the noises made by CJ and the girl. In the PC version, you can only hear the vehicle bumping. The PC version also has more shrubbery, but only shows one phase of the moon. It's either full or not visible. More vehicles spawn in the PS2 version, however drivers get more aggressive after you run into them on the PC version. Skin options were reduced from the PC version because of the game's health mechanic, where the character could be normal, buff, or fat depending on their choices. Reskinning the character became more difficult due to the different body shapes. Cooperative play was removed for the PC version of the game, but can be added back with the use of mods. Speaking of cut content, San Andreas had to leave certain things out of the final product. There are 3 total gangs that go unused, including an Italian mafia. There are also multiple cut character models that seem intended to add distinction between the cities. There are different taxi drivers, police outfits, and motorbike cops for each city. The models also had unused voice and sound files. Some unused audio exists for a skateboarder character who is fully voice acted and would even have ridden a skateboard. There's also data in the game's code suggesting skateboards would have been used as both a weapon and a vehicle for CJ. The model and texture still exist in the game, but there's no way to fully re-enable its weapon and vehicle capabilities. This idea was revived by Rockstar and implemented in their next release, Bully. Though there's code present for it in the game, a quadruple insane stunt can't be completed due to a coding error. A similar error prevents the player from being rewarded for completing perfect insane stunts, though these issues can be fixed by those willing to tweak the game's code. There are also a number of deleted missions. Impounded, as the title suggests, sees the player retrieve a fancy car CJ and Caesar were working on after it gets impounded. There would have been a sequel mission to that called Hold Up, also featuring Caesar. While there's a mission called Doberman in the final game, a second Doberman mission exists in the code. This unused mission is a drug bust that CJ had to complete for Officer Tenpenny. The mission named Doberman in the final game was originally called Gang Wars. The tanked up mission would have had CJ controlling a miniature tank to destroy buggies Berkeley had set against Zero. The mission The Truth Is Out There was supposedly meant to be given by The Truth after he was held up in Bayside for entering Area 69. The mission All-Terrain Takedown would have seen CJ entering Big Smoke's palace. Although many missions were cut, San Andreas had the capability to support mission packs, which would add additional content. Interestingly, this leftover functionality is now exploited by modders to add user-created missions into the game. There were rumors the rapper 50 Cent was going to play CJ in the run-up to the game's release, as CJ could be read as a contraction of Curtis Jackson, 50 Cent's real name. However, Rockstar denied the claim, telling Electronic Gaming Monthly he had nothing to do with this sequel.
Did you know Hideo Kojima started the 800-page script for Metal Gear Solid 2 Sons of Liberty in November 1998, barely 2 months after the release of the original Metal Gear Solid? To motivate his team, Kojima came up with an American-style work concept. He gave every person an idea notebook, requiring them to write down at least one idea each day that might add to the gameplay. If an idea seemed promising, the team ran programming tests on it, and when a new mechanic worked and improved the game, they kept it. The abilities to dispose of bombs with the freezing spray and to peek around corners while sidling against a wall are just 2 of the additions that came from these notebooks. Metal Gear Solid 2 was the first game in the franchise to use motion capture. Mr. Motosada Mori, a military advisor, guided the actors' movements and proper weapon handling. Mr. Moray even made the development team reenact scenarios to get a better understanding of how the military and civilians might react in them. Though the series is fairly realistic, the style of MGS2 might nearly have gone in a different direction. An early model of Snake reveals an alternate texture style that never made it into the game. Called Shinkawa Touch Experimental Model, the texture attempts to replicate the brushwork in Yoji Shinkawa's concept art. A cel-shaded model of Mei Ling, who was eventually cut from the story, can also be found. These early models suggest different visual styles were explored before deciding on the more realistic approach of the final game. Sound director Kazuku Muraoka wanted to use the game's increased budget to give MGS2 the Hollywood action music it deserved. When Muraoka and Kojima saw the movie The Replacement Killers, they were impressed by the film's soundtrack. Muraoka said, "We especially liked the energy and the excellent use of synthesizers." The development team contacted the film's composer, Harry Gregson Williams, and gave him a compilation CD of his past works, burnt by Kojima himself. Gregson Williams, who's worked on Armageddon, Enemy of the State, and The Martian, remembered the incident saying, "Flattery will get you everywhere, and as soon as I received the CD, I realized that I've never done a video game before, so why not do it? They seem like very decent people, so that's how I came to be doing it." According to Kojima, the original plot of the game involved nuclear weapons inspections in Iraq and Iran, and had Solid Snake trying to intercept Metal Gear while it was situated on an aircraft carrier. Unfortunately, after 6 months in production, tense political situations in the Middle East became a concern. Only a month before the game's release, the September 11th attacks in New York prompted the team to change the finale. The original ending had the ship Arsenal Gear dislocate the Statue of Liberty and crash into Manhattan. There's also a newscast showing the Statue of Liberty resting on Ellis Island after the credits. Another change influenced by the event was the spelling of Raiden in Japanese. It was initially written in katakana, which closely resembled the lettering for Laden. Not wanting their protagonist to be associated with Osama bin Laden, the team instead wrote Raiden in kanji. Kojima wanted Raiden to give players a new perspective on Snake. He elaborated, saying, "In MGS2, I wanted to give depth to the Snake character, which is very hard to do when the player is playing Snake himself. So I got the idea of distancing the viewer from Snake to provide a more objective view of him. Thanks to this system, Snake grows in stature. When you play Raiden, who is only a beginner, and then encounters Snake, he suddenly seems more impressive." Raiden's reveal as the protagonist in MGS2 was well hidden during development. Almost nobody outside of the development team knew that Raiden existed, due to covering up Raiden's face or switching his model for Solid Snakes in promotional trailers. This was apparently a reference to Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The twist that Arnold Schwarzenegger was not the bad guy runs parallel to the twist of Snake not being the protagonist of Metal Gear Solid 2. It's no secret that Kojima often finds inspiration in Hollywood films. MGS2 also references Kojima's favorite movie, 2001: A Space Odyssey. In the opening scene, a brief shot shows the tanker's name, Discovery. This is the same name as the spacecraft operated by HAL 9000. In the same scene, Snake drops down onto the tanker in a similar way to how the Terminator is introduced in Terminator 2, kneeling on the ground with electric pulses dancing around him. Kojima created Snake and Raiden to parallel movie giants Godzilla and King Kong. Solid Snake is a creation of man and science, akin to Godzilla. Raiden, however, was lured by a woman, captured by Solidus, and taken to the city, just as King Kong was. According to Kojima, Solid Snake frees Raiden, who is free to return from whence he came. But Solid Snake is Godzilla, and as long as Metal Gear exists, he will stay with men and keep fighting. The game also makes intentional nods to the 1997 film Titanic. The beginning scene features a tanker sinking in a similar manner before transitioning into a conversation between 2 lovers named Jack and Rose. In MGS2, Snake uses the alias Iroquois Pliskin. The name Snake Plissken plays homage to Kurt Russell's character Snake Plissken in the 1981 John Carpenter film Escape from New York. And to keep the snake theme, Iroquois means rattlesnake. The character Vamp was originally meant to be female, but was changed to be male after the team created the character Fortune. For Vamp, Shinkawa took inspiration from famous Spanish flamenco dancer Joaquin Cortez. Vamp not only reflects his appearance, but also imitates his bold dance moves. Vamp's original theme, played in the making of Metal Gear Solid 2 documentary, even has flamenco undertones, although this theme is changed in the actual game. Vamp was somewhat merged with a cut character called the Chinaman. Based on the actor Jet Li, the Chinaman was a Vietnamese man from New York's Chinatown. He had a body dragon tattoo that came to life as soon as he dove into water. Vamp ended up inheriting a quarter of the Chinaman's moves, including walking on water and walls, as well as his boss stage. MGS2 was the first Metal Gear game where the player could freely aim weapons and observe surroundings in first-person view, which would reveal some interesting details. Killing an enemy in first person, for example, splattered blood on the player's screen. Several seagull gags were also implemented. If the player looks up at seagulls for a few seconds, bird droppings hit the screen. Running across areas where bird excrement is visible causes Raiden to slip and fall in a cartoonish manner. Dog tags were also a new addition to the series. Players get these tags by shaking down guards and pointing a gun to their head or crotch. The majority of tags are the names of fans who entered a dog tag contest on Konami's website. The developers wanted players to feel as if their actions truly affected the game's world. This included interactions with other characters. If the player aims a gun at Snake while he's sleeping in strut B, he immediately wakes up and points his gun at Raiden. Repeated hostility will lead Snake to be wary of the player, drawing his weapon whenever the player comes near. Snake isn't the only ally you can anger either. Rose gets pretty touchy as well. If a player shoots multiple seagulls, Rose scolds Raiden for shooting defenseless animals. You can also anger her by punching or kicking hostages, or taking a peek up the hostage Jennifer's skirt. These actions cause Rose to refuse to save your progress until you apologize. Several funny, and borderline creepy, Easter eggs can be found in the game too. While the Colonel's AI is malfunctioning, he will spout off all kinds of gibberish. One codec has him quickly saying, These names are also chanted by Gray Fox in the first Metal Gear Solid. The words in this recurring event are train stations of the Myokin Line, which operates in the Kansai region of Japan. In the same sequence, Raiden gets a call while running naked through Arsenal Gear, and if the player doesn't answer, the radar screen is eventually replaced with a real-life silent video of a young woman. While Raiden is making his exit through Arsenal Gear, all the rooms bear names of digestive organs. Kojima took this idea from the 1940 Disney movie Pinocchio. In the film, Monstro, a colossal sperm whale, swallows Pinocchio and Geppetto. Kojima uses this to give the players the impression that they were being swallowed by a huge machine and gradually digested. Did you know Metal Gear Solid 3 was created as an apology of sorts for Metal Gear Solid 2? Although MGS2 sold well, fans were polarized. In response to this, Metal Gear Solid 3 periodically mocked Raiden. The most obvious jab was Major Ivan Raidinovich Rykov, a character that resembled Raiden. Rykov was the implied secret lover of Colonel Volgin, also known as Thunderbolt. The name Raidinovich is another joke, as it can be interpreted as Thunderbolt's bitch. Kojima explained that he intentionally placed the effeminate Rykov in MGS3 so players could vent their Raiden-induced frustrations. In a way, Kojima felt the same frustration, telling PlayStation 2 Official Magazine, "I put my career on the line with Raiden. I did it to entertain people by totally destroying what I had built up, earned, and achieved with MGS1. I really wanted people to be amused by that, but they started bashing him and I guess I wasn't happy." Kojima never intended to direct Snake Eater. His goal was to hand production over to his team, but he ended up coming back when things weren't progressing as planned. Kojima has always been a fan of integrating his personal experiences into the Metal Gear franchise. The Virtuous Mission takes place on August 24th, 1964, Kojima's first birthday. He originally intended the game to be set during the year of his birth, 1963, but he also wanted the Kennedy assassination to be part of the story. Naked Snake was apparently planned to have a physical constitution similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger. As well as being bulky, he was going to stand around 6 foot 5 feet tall. Snake Eater's new jungle environments included uneven terrain, which posed a problem for developers. The solution was to drop the collision engine used in previous games and create an entirely new one. The camera angle was also an issue in the game's original release. Some complained about the camera being restricted to a top-down view. Kojima explained the choice, saying he wanted to maintain consistency between the games. In an interview with IGN, Kojima admitted another factor in this decision. When the team experimented with the camera being behind Snake, he would feel sick. Like other Metal Gear games, MGS3 took inspiration from movies, books, and TV. Some pieces of media that inspired the game were George Orwell's 1984, Papillion, Dr. No, The Great Escape, and Richard Dawkins's The Selfish Gene. According to Kojima, the team would take overnight trips to brainstorm ideas for the game. On one of these trips, he remembers seeing John McTiernan's film, Predator. The movie's jungle setting and camouflage mechanics heavily influenced the final game. After Metal Gear Solid 2 was completed, composer Harry Gregson Williams told Kojima that he didn't want to make high-tech sounding music anymore. Williams said that if the next game was set in the jungle, however, he might consider composing for it. Kojima told Williams he chose the jungle setting just to have Williams on board, even though a jungle theme was already being considered. It wasn't until all the music was composed that Kojima came clean. Kojima took the movie references one step further with the secret minigame, Snake vs. Monkey. The original 5 stages were titled as parodies of Escape from New York, the detective series Dragnet, 1968's Planet of the Apes, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead, Cape Fear, and Gone with the Wind. Though the North American and Japanese versions of Snake Eater contain 5 stages for Snake vs. Monkey, the European version of the game contains 2 additional levels, Return of the Living Apes and The Apes of Wrath. These additional levels were made due to the game's late release in Europe. This minigame was also meant to be family-friendly, with Snake immobilizing the apes with stun grenades instead of killing them. This isn't the only minigame hidden in MGS3 either. Guy Savage is a secret level that can be accessed after Snake is tortured by Colonel Volgan. Upon saving and reloading, a dream sequence will begin where the player is placed in the role of a dual-wielding swordsman. The game ends after a short time, or if the player dies. Though it is not known why the minigame was included in MGS3, Kojima initially wanted Gradius to be featured in this part of the game instead. According to writer Shuyo Murata, there was talk of the minigame being expanded into a standalone game of its own, but that idea was scrapped. If the player kills Ocelot, a game over screen with the words "Ocelot is dead" appears, slowly transforming into the words "Time Paradox." Colonel Campbell will also scold Snake for creating a time paradox.
You changed the future. You've created a time paradox.
In the Japanese game, this is another subtle movie reference. Japanese voice actor Aono Takeshi, who plays Colonel Campbell, also provided the voice of Doc Brown in the Japanese release of Back to the Future. The movie's theme of preventing a time paradox also carries over to MGS3 through Takeshi's dialogue. A food item in MGS3 called Calorie Mate is actually for sale in Japan. It's a nutritional energy product available in various flavors and comes in a block, jelly, or canned form. When Snake uses this item, he fully regains stamina. Snake appeared in some co-branded ads with slogans such as, "If you want to survive, eat this," and "Even when you fight alone, you've got a mate." Kojima even mentioned that Snake's favorite is the chocolate-flavored Calorie Mate block. Interestingly, the game takes place nearly 2 decades before Calorie Mate even existed. The names of the Cobra Unit were all based on emotions relating to war: pain, fear, fury, sorrow, and joy. The end was planned to be called The Doom. The name was changed, partly due to the prominence of the game Doom 3. Kojima originally wanted the fight against the End to be an intense tactical battle that would go on for weeks. After some experiments were conducted, he was told it would be impossible. The fight with the End can be difficult, but there are ways to easily defeat him. Snake can use his sniper rifle to pick off the End while he sits in his wheelchair on the dock. This will completely skip the sniper battle in the jungle, and Snake will have to fight Ocelot unit troops instead. Another easy way to beat the End is by reaching the area where his boss battle occurs, saving the game, and turning off the console. If the player reloads the save file after a week, or puts the system clock forward a week, the End will die of old age. One of the boss's earlier designs had a snake head tattoo on her exposed breast. This was so that when she fired a gun, her breast would jiggle and make the snake appear to be laughing. The river where Snake faces the sorrow was inspired by the River of Three Crossings, which refers to a Japanese Buddhist belief similar to the river Styx from Greek mythology. Kojima also planned for the sorrow to quote the Nose railway stops, an Easter egg that appeared in both Metal Gear Solid 1 and 2. The overall design for the Fear was based on character designer Yoji Shinkawa's initial design for Raiden. The very first concept of Raiden was a Spider-Man-like character who crawls on the floor on all fours. His personality was that of a weirdo who'd lick bird droppings, though Kojima rejected the idea immediately. In one scene, Snake is hit with a bolt coated in the venom of the Brazilian wandering spider. The Fear describes the grim effects of the venom to intimidate Snake, but he neglects to mention one effect of the venom. As well as causing intense pain, the venom also has similar properties to Viagra, giving the victim an erection.
Did you know? Kingdom Hearts owes its existence to a string of chance events. The first of these events was when Final Fantasy developer Tetsuya Nomura overheard a conversation between Square Enix executive Shinji Hashimoto and Final Fantasy creator Hironobu Sakaguchi. Nomura heard them saying something along the lines of, "Mickey Mouse would have been great, but we can't use him," and stated that he was interested in working on whatever this mystery project was. In an interview with Nintendo CEO Satoru Iwata, Nomura explained why he was interested in the project, saying that while he was working on Final Fantasy VII, Super Mario 64 was released for the Nintendo 64. Super Mario 64's fully three-dimensional environments and the freedom you had to explore these environments had a huge impact on him. When Nomura told his colleagues that he wanted to make a game like Super Mario 64, they said, "But Mario is already a world-famous character. It would be impossible to start from scratch with an all-new character." But Nomura felt that Disney had some of the few characters that could rival Mario in popularity, and jumped at the chance to realize his ideas when he overheard Hashimoto and Sakaguchi talking. They later both agreed to give Nomura a chance to direct the project. The second chance event was when Hashimoto unwittingly stepped into an elevator with a Disney executive. At the time, Disney and Square both worked in the same building, so the elevator ride gave Hashimoto the chance to pitch the idea of a collaboration directly to Disney. They quickly came up with the idea of a crossover as a vague production concept, and Hironobu Sakaguchi later agreed to using Final Fantasy and Disney characters together. At the start of development, Disney wanted Donald Duck to be the game's protagonist, while Square wanted Mickey Mouse. Nomura felt that neither would work well, and wanted to develop an original character based on Disney's iconic style. So in the end, Sora was created. Sora was originally going to wield a chainsaw sword instead of a keyblade, and his design was going to resemble that of a lion. Sora's final design, however, had yellow shoes, red shorts, and white gloves, all inspired by Mickey Mouse. The game's story was also originally going to be a much simpler, Disney-styled story, but it was altered to appeal more to Final Fantasy fans. 2 months before Kingdom Hearts released, Square held a promotional contest for the game exclusively in the US. The winner of the contest would have their name used in the game. The lucky winner was New Yorker Kurt Zisa, and his name would be used for the game's six-armed hidden boss of the same name. Final Fantasy X's Riku was originally going to play a major role in the first Kingdom Hearts game. She was going to be a part of Leon's group in Traverse Town and help Sora throughout the game. She was removed because her name was too similar to the character Riku, and she was ultimately replaced with Yuffie. She did, however, later appear with the rest of the Gullwings in Kingdom Hearts 2. In an interview with Tetsuya Nomura, he revealed that Cloud's appearance in Kingdom Hearts was inspired by Final Fantasy VII's Vincent Valentine, saying, "This time, in this setting, Cloud is leaning towards the dark side, and I wanted to make him a bit more demon-like. And, since Vincent was exactly that kind of design, I just added it in. Although, I would have liked to put Vincent in the game too." The Kingdom Hearts series also has an abundance of unused levels. Disney Castle was planned to be playable in the first Kingdom Hearts game, for example. The area was shown in early trailers for the game, but the level was cut from the final version. That said, the castle can still be accessed using cheat codes. The Lion King's Pride Lands were also planned to be a playable level, with Sora turning into a lion to fight. This idea was scrapped as fighting and walking with a four-legged body required additional programming, and the team didn't have enough time to implement the idea. However, the idea was later used in Kingdom Hearts 2. The Tarzan level Deep Jungle, which appeared in the first Kingdom Hearts, didn't appear in Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories and its remake. The reason for its absence was that Disney and Square couldn't get the the rights to use the Tarzan concept or characters from their copyright holders, the estate of Edgar Rice Burroughs. A world based on the Jungle Book can also be found in the code for Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. The world can still be played through cheat codes, though it's unfinished. It's not known why this level was scrapped though. The enemy Assault Rider was meant to appear in the first Kingdom Hearts game, but it didn't seem to fit in with any of the game's worlds, so it was removed and later used in Kingdom Hearts 2 instead. The reoccurring Final Fantasy summon Bahamut was planned to be a usable summon in Kingdom Hearts. It would have been used by Sora, but it was removed from the final version of the game. Searching through the game's data reveals a Bahamut summon option does exist. When the option is hacked back in the game and selected, however, the game will simply crash. Toy Story's Woody and Buzz Lightyear were set to appear as summons in Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix, but were removed for unknown reasons. The untextured models can still be found in the game's code, amongst the game's other summons. Pleakley from the film Lilo and Stitch was originally going to be present in the Deep Space level in Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep. He was removed for unknown reasons, but a character model can still be found within the game's code. Originally, the Kingdom Hearts 2 final boss Xemnas was going to utilize 2 other gigantic forms, although it's not known why these forms were removed. Of course, it's evident to see that there are many pieces of cut content and lost information within the Kingdom Hearts series, but the biggest loss by far was the loss of all original data and assets for the first Kingdom Hearts game. This is the reason Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5 Remix is reported to have been made from the ground up. One last interesting piece on Kingdom Hearts is that the actress Catherine Beaumont, who voiced Alice in Disney's Alice in Wonderland at the age of 13, reprised her role as Alice in Kingdom Hearts over 50 years later at the age of 64.
Of course! I've done absolutely nothing wrong.
Did you know? Several teasers and trailers from the Kingdom Hearts series have featured scenes that were either heavily altered or unused in the final products. The very first trailer for Kingdom Hearts features a segment with Riku standing atop Big Ben in Neverland, not seen in the final game. Additionally, Donald Duck and Goofy wear their traditional outfits, rather than the Final Fantasy-inspired costumes they were given in-game. The first trailer for Kingdom Hearts 2 also included several tweaked scenes. Most notably is that Sora, Donald, Goofy, and 5 members of Organization 13 are seen in the Hollow Bastion level from the first game, and there's a comedic scene where Donald freezes himself with magic. Interestingly, Roxas's face was also obscured for the entirety of the trailer and other early promotional materials for reasons that aren't entirely clear. A partially hidden end-of-game teaser for Kingdom Hearts 2 was included in the first game, titled Another Side, Another Story. The teaser featured pre-rendered CG animation created by some of the same team that animated the Final Fantasy VII spin-off, Advent Children. Though conceived as a non-canon concept trailer showcasing unconnected ideas for a sequel, several aspects of the trailer did eventually make their way into official parts of the series. The main sequence from the video was briefly retold in Kingdom Hearts 2 through a flashback, and was an integral part of the spin-off 358 over 2 days. Additionally, the seemingly random quotes that appear throughout the trailer were added in the Kingdom Hearts 2 script by writer Kazushige Nojima after an official story had been crafted. Kingdom Hearts 2 featured a similar pre-rendered trailer titled Birth by Sleep, which teased a climactic scene from the game with the same name. Despite first being released in Japan, the international versions of Kingdom Hearts actually feature additional content. New music and battles against Kurtzisa, the Phantom, and Sephiroth weren't in the initial Japanese game, and wouldn't be included until the release of a special Japan-exclusive version titled Kingdom Hearts Final Mix. This upgraded rendition also contained even more new content, including cutscenes, enemies, weapons, and a secret boss battle against a powerful and mysterious hooded man. Kingdom Hearts 2's Final Mix similarly featured new content, including an entirely new battle between Sora and Roxas in the world that never was, which originally occurred as just a cutscene. Additionally, optional boss battles with all the deceased members of Organization 13 were added, a feature series developer Tetsuya Nomura and his team wished to include from the very beginning. They originally planned for these battles to take place in the Underworld's Coliseum as a way to rationalize bringing back dead characters, but they had to be cut due to time constraints. Interestingly, while all of the Final Mix versions were originally Japan exclusive, each of them featured their respective game's English dubs. Though the original reasoning behind this decision is unknown, according to series creator Tetsuya Nomura, the later Final Mix games continued the tradition because, compared to Final Fantasy, there's a high demand for the English version of Kingdom Hearts. I assume it's because there are many fans who came in through Final Mix, so it felt quite weird to play Kingdom Hearts 2 in Japanese when they played the previous games in English. Thanks to Final Mix selling very well, many fans think the English voices are meant for Kingdom Hearts. Several parts of Kingdom Hearts were censored while being localized for the North American market. Green blood originally squirted out when one of the heads of the Hydra was cut off during its boss battle, but the American version instead features purple smoke billowing out. After using an incredibly powerful attack near the climax of the game, Axel is no longer shown to be on fire in the North American version, and the crosshairs shown on Xigbar's weapon during his boss battle were changed so they no longer resembled a real gun's scope. Several aspects of Port Royal, the world based on the Pirates of the Caribbean films, were also censored. The guns held by enemy pirates were changed to crossbows in the North American release, despite still producing a gunshot when fired. These pirate enemies also no longer catch on fire when hit with fire-based magic attacks. The cutscene where Jack Sparrow is stabbed by Captain Barbossa was tweaked and no longer features a sword sticking out of Jack. And the scene where Will Turner threatens to shoot himself, while nearly identical to the films in the Japanese release, was reanimated for the international market. In the March 2007 issue of Electronic Gaming Monthly, a new Wii exclusive game called Mushroom Kingdom Hearts was teased. The magazine claimed that this new title in the franchise would include both new and returning Disney and Kingdom Hearts characters alongside Nintendo characters and worlds. The article was complete with new artwork of a redesigned Mario holding a Keyblade alongside Sora and Mickey Mouse, and a logo featuring the iconic Super Mario mushroom with the Kingdom Hearts crown symbol on its head. This game, of course, never materialized. EGM later confirmed that this article was their annual April Fool's joke, and that the Mario render was just Photoshop Super Mario Sunshine artwork. There have been other real projects in the Kingdom Hearts franchise that were put into production but never saw release. After the success of the first Kingdom Hearts game in the early 2000s, Disney and Square put an animated adaptation into production. The two companies hired storyboard artist Seth Kearsley of Disney's television animation division to write and direct an animatic pilot for a potential series, and he was given complete creative freedom over the project. After playing through the first game, Kearsley constructed his own interpretation of Sora's journey to Agrabah. He was given access to the Disney Animation Archive, and intended to use the actual background from the Aladdin animated feature to both save money and give the series an authentic feel. Kearsley later uploaded several storyboards from the pilot to the internet in 2013, stating that despite testing extremely well with audiences, the show wasn't picked up because it was a vastly different interpretation of the Kingdom Hearts story. Disney and Square had already agreed to make more games and didn't want the series to conflict with any future plot points. Another Kingdom Hearts spin-off that never saw the light of day was an iOS and Android title called Kingdom Hearts Fragmented Keys. This game was in development at Disney Interactive subsidiary Wide Load Games before its cancellation in early 2014. The title would have featured several Kingdom Hearts characters traveling to numerous Disney universes through a hub world and fighting evil along the way. Concept art for several Disney-themed worlds intended for Fragmented Keys was later leaked online, and included places based on Tron, Lilo and Stitch, Wreck-It Ralph, Tangled, Frozen, and most interestingly, the Star Wars Clone Wars cartoon. Though it's unknown if any of this art made it past the conceptual phase, series creator Tetsuya Nomura is an admitted fan of Star Wars and has mentioned in the past that he would jump at the chance to include the franchise in Kingdom Hearts.
In today's episode, we'll be exploring a bunch of trivia relating to games on the PlayStation 2. Absolutely dominating the gaming market in its heyday, the PlayStation 2 not only became the best-selling console of all time, but the system also has the biggest games library of all time. We're starting our exploration of these titles by diving into Final Fantasy X and one of the game's regional differences. In one of the game's cutscenes, there's a reference to the popular Spanish dance song Macarena, which penetrated English-speaking cultures in 1995. In the scene, Tidus mistakenly calls Macalania Temple the Macarena Temple, and follows up the reference with a sound reminiscent of the Macarena song.
They say Seymour went to Macarena Temple.
Macalania Temple.
Aye?
As you might expect, the dialogue in the Japanese game is different and has no musical reference at all. As revealed by Legends of Localization's Clyde Mandolin, what a guy, Tidus just incorrectly calls Macalania Temple the Malakania Temple. One of the game's localizers, Richard Honeywood, was asked about the reference by the Final Fantasy Compendium. Honeywood said, "I can still remember when Alex was writing that line. I'm always a sucker for silly humor and I'm a pop culture junkie. Of course, I laughed and agreed to it at the time, so long as the was done in a way that wouldn't seem really strange to people who didn't know the song." Another game in the series with several localization differences is Final Fantasy VII's spin-off, Dirge of Cerberus. The game's first release in Japan featured its own online multiplayer mode, and with it, a fair share of story-based missions with their own cutscenes. While the game was reworked during localization for the Western market, it was decided this feature would be removed. To compensate for its removal, Square Enix changed the missions to be single-player instead, though without any of the story elements involved. The game was released for a second time in Japan as Dirge of Cerberus International, retaining all the changes that had been made for the West, though with the inclusion of all the cutscenes that were included with the original multiplayer mode. A number of gameplay changes exist between the original Japanese release and the later international version after the original received negative criticism. It was made possible for Vincent to use attacks while in the air, he could now double jump and would run 20% faster. The game's camera was also adjusted as a way to help make navigation easier. Another game with differences to its original version is Tekken Tag Tournament. The game was originally released in arcades before hitting the PlayStation 2, with both versions having some significant differences. This was because, unlike the PlayStation version, the arcade release was made as a kit which could be used to upgrade cabinets of Tekken 3, resulting in a version of Tekken Tag that would use the same 32-bit engine and graphics of Tekken 3. When porting the game to the PS2, the graphics were massively overhauled, the soundtrack was updated and expanded, and several stages were added. While both versions play similarly, there are noticeable differences, with some attacks being more or less viable between releases. While upgrading the character models for the PS2, the developers decided to add polygons for each of the characters' teeth, an addition that the series producer Harada looked back on and noted how he thought that it was a total waste of polygons. Namco aren't the only company to have experienced regret when it comes to the games industry. When Acclaim were trying to promote Shadow Man's Second Coming in the UK, or Second Coming if you're a smartass, they had the morbid idea of paying relatives of people who'd recently died to use their gravestones as small billboards advertising the game. Acclaim communications manager Sean White stated, "The concept of what we're calling deadvertising is entirely consistent with the theme of the Shadow Man's Second Coming game and provides us with a permanent presence for our advertising. Content and context are two important principles of marketing Shadow Man." Unsurprisingly, this was met with controversy and was seen as being in poor taste. Even the Church of England came out and said that it would not allow any of its graveyards to be used for the sake of advertising Shadow Man 2. The company claimed advertising on gravestones would be outside the codes of conduct or regulations that any formal advertising body would have to adhere to. However, the chairman of the Outdoor Advertising Association stated that any attempt to advertise on a headstone would require planning permission from a local authority, regardless of the land being public or private. Responding to the criticism, Acclaim acknowledged that some may find the stunt offensive, but that others from poorer backgrounds may see the opportunity as a benefit to subsidizing their burial costs and give their loved ones a unique send-off, rejecting the implication that the whole thing was morally bankrupt. Another piece of trivia from one of the PS2's spookier titles comes from Silent Hill 3. Those who played the game with a save file of Silent Hill 2 on their memory card were treated to an additional cutscene that would otherwise never be shown. The scene involved Heather contemplating reaching into a toilet, but not being able to go through with it. She then looks at the camera and asks,
"Who would even think of doing something so disgusting?"
This is in reference to a similar scene found in Silent Hill 2, which sees James Sunderland fishing a wallet out from deep within a toilet. One horror game which began its life as another title was Devil May Cry, which was initially planned as Resident Evil 4. During the game's development as a sequel, the main protagonist who would become Dante was originally named Tony. Hideki Kamiya also claimed his surname was planned to be Redgrave, in honor of Chris Redfield from Resident Evil. The idea of Tony Redgrave's name being a homage was later worked into the Devil May Cry story, notably as the journalist that Dante has a lot of respect for. Dante would even use the name as an alias during his mercenary days of demon hunting. The name was also engraved onto his signature handguns Ebony and Ivory. Tony Redgrave would later reappear in another Capcom game, Bayonetta. In the world of Bayonetta, Antonio Redgrave is a world-famous journalist, and would later be confirmed as the same Antonio Redgrave that Dante held in such high regard. Our next piece of trivia comes from Dark Souls creators From Software. The soundtrack of one of their PS2 titles, Evergrace, consisted mostly of voice samples. Composer Kota Hoshino explained to Rocket Baby, "At the beginning, I was thinking of expressing the voice. I recorded my voice and some sample voices and then edited them with SoundForge. It finally became the voice that you can hear in the opening of Evergrace." Hoshino wanted to create a soundtrack that would express the verge between pop and non-pop music, and besides the voice and instruments he already had, would build upon pre-arranged percussion tracks taken from a sample CD. Another auditory secret comes from Metal Gear Solid 2. The alternate name of the Patriots, the Lali Lule Lo, fun to say, so give it a go, was chosen because the English L sound does not exist in the Japanese phonetic alphabet. This makes it nearly impossible for native Japanese speakers to say, which is implied to be why the Patriots used the name. However, since the English phonetic alphabet is fairly comprehensive and contains the L sound, the concept wouldn't be translated over when the game was localized. With a game that's all about sound, the original Guitar Hero's release actually featured a hidden track which could only be accessed through a cheat device such as a Game Shark. The track was composed by Andy Buch, credited as Andrew Buch, a former member of staff for Harmonix. The reason for the song's lack of appearance in the titles menu is because, as a designer for the company stated, it was snuck onto the disc by someone in QA without the dev team knowing until it was too late. Needless to say, they don't work at Harmonix anymore. Andy actually has a page on her own website which provides these codes to reinsert the track into the game. The song ultimately saw release on the Rock Band Network, a service to add additional songs to Rock Band, with the description, "Long ago, in the dawn of our rhythm gaming civilization, there was a song that rocked so hard it was banned from the land. Known by many names, those who dared seek it had to undergo a perilous quest in order to unearth it from its tomb." There was a second track on the disc which was similarly not included in the final release, but is accessible with a cheat device. Graveyard Shift has no author listed in its data, though the developers reported that an employee by the name of Aaron was behind the song's creation. The game's credits lists an Aaron DeMuth as an additional artist for the title, though it's never been confirmed whether this is the same Aaron that created the track. One of the few unlicensed releases for the PS2 has its own dirty little secret. Developed by Code Junkies and published by Dattel, Max Play Classic Games was a compilation of Game Boy Advance games with its own built-in emulator. While some people may have praised this idea at the time, when they played the release on their PlayStation 2 console, they were in for a disappointing ride. The 10 games that are on the disc are all remakes of classic titles, such as Invaders, Loop the Loop, Bounty Hunter X, and Pop'em. It seems the team weren't quite as capable as they had hoped, however, as when playing any of these games, the game's menu music would not stop, and the games themselves would have no sound. Shockingly, to top this off, a folder can be found on the game's disc called delete_me, a request which was seemingly ignored before the final product was sent to print. Inside this folder is a complete ROM for Nintendo's Metroid Fusion, a possible remnant of their testing environment for the self-coded emulator.
Did you know? One of the earliest inspirations for Okami was Capcom's remake of Resident Evil. Released in 2002 and originally developed for the Nintendo GameCube, Resident Evil utilized the new console's graphical capabilities and stunned critics with its atmospheric visuals. As Hideki Kamiya, Okami's director, recalled, "The Resident Evil team was the first team I worked with after I joined Capcom. When it was remade for the GameCube, I was very impressed by how far the visuals had come in their ability to depict realistic situations. I thought if we had enough institutional knowledge at Capcom to make a realistic horror game like Resident Evil, then I also wanted to try using this technology to make a world that was glistening and beautiful." That feeling was at the root of Okami. Kamiya explained that living and working in an urban environment had awakened a sense of hometown nostalgia in him, and he longed for the peaceful Japanese countryside. In order to satisfy his yearning for a rural setting, he made nature a focal point for his new project. Kamiya originally wanted Okami to have a realistic art style. In fact, completing the game unlocks a short clip that shows players the original artistic direction of the project. However, the concept had to be scrapped as the team couldn't achieve the level of detail they wanted to with the PlayStation 2's hardware limitations. According to Okami's producer, Atsushi Inaba, an art designer showed the development team a style inspired by sumie, or Japanese black ink paintings. The team loved the concept and decided to base the game's aesthetics on that. While developing the game in this new art style, Inaba wanted players to get involved with the artwork, rather than passively observing it. This led to the implementation of the celestial brush mechanic. As Amaterasu doesn't have a place to store an actual brush, the team decided to use her tail to draw instead. The developers wanted players to have fun with the celestial brush in the game's world, rather than run straight through the story. As a result, using the brush techniques on the game's environments can have some humorous effects. For example, power slashing the scroll in Susano's house will reveal a hidden picture of Kushi, and using whirlwind near characters and animals can cause them to get caught in the cyclone. The realistic art style wasn't the only thing that didn't make it into the final game. Early concept art showed Amaterasu transforming into a dolphin while swimming, and into a falcon while leaping from high edges. The 8 canine warrior characters were originally planned to be human. Due to difficulties designing their human forms, Okami's lead character designer, Kenichiro Yoshimura, put the 8 canine warriors aside to focus on other things. By the time Yoshimura returned to work on their designs, the scenario writers had already included the warriors in the game as actual dogs. Though shocked, Yoshimura went along with the idea. The character Isun, meanwhile, wasn't even planned to be in the game. According to Kamiya, the team knew Amaterasu needed a guide to compensate for her lack of dialogue. They eventually settled on someone tiny, no bigger than a flea, foul-mouthed and lecherous, which became the basis for Isun. Inspiration from many of the game's characters and plot points draw heavily from Shinto mythology and Japanese folklore. Isun is based on the Japanese folktale of Isun Boshi, in which an elderly couple wish for a child. Their wish is granted, but the child only grows to be 1 inch tall. The child then leaves his family to find his place in the world, and is given a needle for a sword, which resembles the weapon Isun uses in Okami. In the folktale, Isun defeats an Oni and acquires Ushide's mallet, a magic hammer which he uses to grow to normal size. This mallet appears in Okami as the lucky mallet item. However, the mallet is used to shrink Amaterasu to Isun's size, rather than grow Isun. The characters Amaterasu and Susanoo are based on the Shinto deity siblings of the same names, and the first arc of the game closely follows the Shinto legend of Yamato no Orochi's demise. In the legend, Susanoo meets a grieving elderly couple who reveal that the 8-headed serpent, Yamato no Orochi, has been devouring one of their daughters every year for the past 7 years. Their only remaining daughter is Kushinada Hime, but Orochi is coming for her as well. Susanoo promises to kill the beast, in return for Kushi's hand in marriage, and transforms her into a comb that he places in his hair. The game's Kushi's hair is distinctly comb-shaped. Susanoo and the couple then brew 8 separate servings of sake for the 8 heads of Orochi. When Orochi arrives, all 8 heads intoxicate themselves, and the monster falls unconscious. As the game's boss fight against Orochi shows, Susanoo then chops the monster to bits, slaying it once and for all. Capcom localization producer David Crislip explained that the game was firmly based in Japanese culture. This meant that Capcom could have gone in 2 very different directions with the Western localization of the characters' names. They could have either completely westernized them, or they could have risked alienating the Western audience by keeping the names 100% Japanese. The team instead tried to compensate by shortening some character names. For example, the sake brewer Kushinada was shortened to Kushi, and the Kamiki village boy Mushikai was shortened to Mushi. The localization process was sped up due to the game's lack of proper voice acting. As Crislip explained in an interview with 1UP, it actually is real people talking and then scrambled. If they needed a certain emotion, they'd say, "Speak as if you were angry," and then they'd scramble it and play it backwards or something. Sighing and coughing is quite clearly someone really sighing or coughing. Then they just digitize it. Crislip felt the mumbling aspect fit the fantasy setting of the game and left that as is. Capcom referenced several of their previous games with an Okami. When making your cherry cakes at night, Mrs. Orange will perform the raging demon attack used by Akuma in the Street Fighter series. When the player talks to Tama the pyrotechnist in Shinshu Field, he will unveil his new firework, the Midnight Wonder Boy, alluding to Beautiful Joe's Midnight Thunder Boy. In the same Shinshu Field, the player can purchase a technique from Onigiri Sensei's dojo. Upon doing so, Onigiri will act out a transformation sequence similar to that of Joe's. Another, more direct reference can be found in the Fashion Girl's side quest in Seon City. After completing a few designs for her, the fashion girl will ask for a henshin design. Drawing a V on Mr. Cheek's kimono and fulfilling the fashion girl's request will trigger her to recite Joe's catchphrase, saying, "Look doggy, isn't it beautiful? This is my latest design, the henshin pattern. Henshin a go-go, baby." Another one of Joe's quotes appears just before Amaterasu's second fight with Waka, when he says, "Just go for it." In Amaterasu's first fight with Waka, he'll say, "Let's rock, baby," instead, a reference to Dante from Devil May Cry. In 2007, a full year after Okami's initial PlayStation 2 release, the American development team Ready at Dawn began porting the game to the Wii. Didier Malenfant, Ready at Dawn's president at the time, claimed that the Wii version would be an exact port of the original game. The process proved to be rather difficult, however, as Capcom dissolved Okami's original development studio a mere 2 months after the initial PlayStation 2 release, and much of the work of the original game was missing as a result. Although many assets were provided by Capcom, portions of the game had to be recreated from scratch by Ready at Dawn. Despite claims that no content would be cut during the port, the original Clover Studios credits were missing from the Wii version. Kamiya stated, "I find it extremely regrettable that the moe that went into the staff role is gone from the game as well. Of course, these weren't just my moe. They were the moe of everyone who worked on the project, put together in a moment of bliss, held out just for those who completed the journey. It was a special staff role for a special moment, and now it's gone. All of it. It's incredibly disappointing and sad." Controversy also arose over the Wii port's North American box art. On the new cover, the watermark for the gaming publication IGN could be seen near Amaterasu's mouth. This seemed to indicate that, rather than taking source material from their own archives, Capcom took the image from IGN's website while making the game's box art. To make up for their mistake, Capcom created an art redemption program. For a limited time, those who had a copy of the Wii version could fill out an application to be sent one of 3 high-resolution replacement covers for free. Development and shipment of the covers took so long that Capcom eventually mailed all 3 of the covers to everyone who had applied to compensate for the delay. The program has since been shut down. Capcom would later hire Japanese studio Hexadrive to remaster Okami on the PlayStation 3. The port was technically very impressive and even renders the game at a 4K resolution. The game is downsampled from 4K to 1080p in real time, resulting in a very smooth and clear image.
Did you know? Shadow of the Colossus was originally codenamed Nico and was going to be a sequel to Ico. The name is a clever play on Ico and the word for 2 in Japanese, ni. The second time Nico was shown, it had become Shadow of the Colossus and was no longer directly related to Ico in any clear fashion. The game's director, Fumito Ueda, explained why these connections were dropped. The ending of Ico was too final, so it didn't need a sequel. Shadow of the Colossus still has a reference to Ico in the form of an alternate skin for Aggro. If you have an Ico save file on the same memory card as your file for Colossus, you'll unlock a skin which replaces the white, diamond-shaped mark on her head with a symbol resembling the eye from the Ico logo. A limited edition Shadow of the Colossus set was sold in Japan, which came with an extra disc titled Nico. The disc included several videos of what Nico might have been like. One of them shows several Ico-styled warriors attacking a Colossus all at once. This could suggest the team considered having multiplayer in Nico. They've since clarified that the characters only existed as placeholders until the gameplay was finalized. While discussing the development of the giant Dormin, however, Ueda jokingly mentioned the potential of multiplayer. It wasn't implemented, but the player can control basically every Colossi. If you connected 2 controllers, 2 people could play. The game has 2 notable unused items, the Mask of Titans and the Eye of the Colossus. The Mask of Titans appears to be a regular mask, but includes the text, "That is the Mask of the Titans." By wearing it, thou shalt gain the power to inflict deeper wounds upon a Colossus. While it's not explicitly clear why this item wasn't included in the game, there is a similar item that did make it into the game, called the Mask of Strength. The Strength mask looks like a slightly downgraded version of the Mask of the Titans, but has the exact same ability text. This suggests the Mask of Strength simply replaced the Mask of the Titans. The Eye of the Colossus is still somewhat usable in an earlier version of the game. The item changes the player's viewpoint so they can see through the eyes of the Colossus they're fighting, but it only works at a reasonably close distance. The item is well integrated with the 1st, 4th, 5th, 6th, 13th, and 15th Colossi, but the perspective constantly shifts for the others. Except for with the 3rd Colossus, where it doesn't work at all. The item can be used before, during, or even as a fight is ending, allowing you to see through the eyes of a Colossus as they die. Shadow of the Colossus features 16 Colossi, but it was planned to host 48 of them. While 48 was simply a proposed amount by Ueda, progress did move forward with 24 of the Colossi. This number was cut to 16 due to time and quality constraints, but the unused Colossi weren't simply thrown away. Producer Kenji Kaido elaborated, "We would condense the individual elements of 2 Colossi down into 1. That way, we weren't just throwing them away, but rather combining them to make figuring out how to defeat them even more interesting." 8 of the unused Colossi made it fairly far into development before being cut. Devil was a smaller colossi that you'd attack with the bow, then climb onto its back. Griffin would have been partly fought on Aggro's back and had a weakness to fire. Monkey would swing from stalactites. Phoenix was covered in flames and had to be plunged into a lake. Rock was removed for being too similar to the 5th Colossus, Avion. Sirius had to be trapped in stone structures during a chase. Spider had to be attacked with a sword while riding Aggro. And the Worm was removed for being too powerful and needing a very large arena to fight in. During development, even optional colossi with no ties to the story were considered. However, though fights between Wander and the colossi were fun, Ueda felt that having irrelevant battles didn't suit the game's direction. Due to the intense approach Team Ico took with Shadow of the Colossus, many small changes were made to the game world. For instance, Leo, the 11th Colossi, was originally going to fight swimming in a giant lake rather than near pools of water. Designer Masanori Kajita stated, "The pools of water that remain around the completed arena were previously an entire lake. It wasn't just that we changed how to defeat Leo and thus the arena came to be the way it is today. Ueda told us to make it seem as though long ago there was once a bigger lake in the area. It was fun to create." The change was also made due to Leo's swimming speed. Making the creature's speed in water match the speed of the player made Leo seem less ferocious. The team definitely put care into how the Colossi and the world was portrayed. Animator Atsuko Fukuyama apparently walked around carrying his bicycle to get a feel of the Colossi's weight for his animations. Giantology is the name of an initially cryptic viral marketing blog used to promote the launch of Shadow of the Colossus. It launched as a blog that delved into the science of mythological creatures being written and managed by fictional character Eric Belson. Eric was supposedly an electronics store owner doing research for a book he was writing called The Age of Giants. For 2 months, starting just before the game's launch, the blog posted several images and videos that appeared to show evidence of the Colossi in Shadow of the Colossus existing in real places all over the world. While it was active, the site got hits from upwards of 25 million people. A surprising amount of behind-the-scenes shuffling affected the ending of Shadow of the Colossus. The game was planned to have a more upbeat, alternate ending, which was tied to an unused game mechanic. Ueda explained, "Originally, we had it so Wander's body would grow each time he defeated a Colossus, and we were thinking of doing something along the lines of Beauty and the Beast. The awakened girl, still unable to see, would grope around for Wander, but his form had changed. Then, as you wondered what was going to happen, the staff role would begin, but in the end, the two would happily mount aggro and ride off. The developers even considered including an alternate ending if the player had an eco save file, but decided it would be unfair to some players. They didn't want to make it an unlockable either, so they just scrapped the whole thing." The mysterious Dormin actually has 2 voice actors. Interestingly, one is a man and one is a woman. The voices of Kazuhiro Nakata and Kyoko Hikami are played at the same time in synchronization, presumably to make Dormin seem genderless.
Did you know? The Jak and Daxter franchise has won many awards and made its way into the Guinness Book of World Records a total of 7 times. The series' records include most successful single-format platform series, largest number of cutscenes in a platform game, and first seamless 3D world in a console game, the honor of which belongs to the first Jak and Daxter game. Work began for Jak 1 in January 1999 under the codename Project Y and was developed by 2 people while the rest of Naughty Dog worked on Crash Team Racing. A game like Jak and Daxter seemed impossible to implement on the original PlayStation, which is why Naughty Dog kept things simple in earlier games like Crash Bandicoot. However, the team realized a fully 3D adventure could be done after they saw Super Mario 64. An issue with games like Mario 64 was that they were very segmented, so one of Naughty Dog's biggest desires for Jak and Daxter was to immerse the player in a large, expansive, singular world. This was made possible with the help of a programming language called Goal. Created by Naughty Dog co-founder Andy Gavin, Goal helped make the game's world seamless with no load times between levels. The smooth animations and colorful visuals, not to mention all the game's runtime code, are all byproducts of Goal. There were some issues with it though. Since only Gavin himself could understand the language, all changes made to it had to come directly from him. It also took over a year to develop the compiler, leaving programmers with missing features. Engineering for Jak 1 took 20 months, and they were so busy working on the game's technology, they didn't get to gameplay coding until fairly late in the project. The designers were forced to create enemies and settings for the game without knowing if they would work properly. But according to programmer Stephen White, had the designers not been so good at their jobs, the project could have been a disaster. The characters also had lengthy development cycles. Concept artist for Crash and Spyro, Charles Zambilis, was asked to create the game's protagonists. For Jak, Naughty Dog wasn't sure what they wanted, so Zambilis came up with several ideas from many different approaches. The first drawings of Jak show him with a wolf-like appearance. Sony of Japan wanted to go down this route with Jak initially, though Naughty Dog wasn't too keen on the design. Eventually, Jak got a more humanoid design based in royalty and heroism. He was later made more animalistic again, with martial arts and Native American themes attached to him. Artist Bob Raffay, a student of Zambilis, tweaked Jak and made his final iteration. According to Naughty Dog co-founder Jason Rubin, Jak's final design is inspired by comic book artist Joe Madureira and his work on Battle Chasers. The game's logo also draws parallels to the Battle Chasers logo. Lastly, Jak's name is of South African origin and was originally suggested by artist Josh Schur. Daxter started off looking very rodent-like, but his design later took on more of a monkey look for a period of time. This idea was scrapped, and Zambilis eventually came up with the design of Daxter we know today. Daxter's design netted Naughty Dog the award for Best Original Character at the 2002 Game Developers Conference, being the first award they ever received for a character. When it came to animating Daxter, animator John Kim was inspired by the movements of the monkey Abu from Disney's Aladdin. By the time Jak 1 was released, Jak 2's development was well underway. Jak 2 took a more mature direction in style and tone, as that's where they felt the industry was going. Games were getting more serious and their demographic was getting older, so Naughty Dog followed suit. One major influence on the game was the Grand Theft Auto series, along with Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Some team members were opposed to the changes made, though one decision everyone liked was giving Jak a voice. Jak was originally mute, as the team thought a silent protagonist would help immerse the player in the game, similar to the likes of Crash Bandicoot. The Crash and Jak series share another connection through an Easter egg. The Venus flytrap enemy from Crash Bandicoot can be seen in Samos's hut in Jak 1, and there are many other secrets to be found in the Jak series. In the PS2 version of Jak 3, you can find a lone box atop a building in the Haven City port. Looking inside reveals a picture of the Naughty Dog development team. Another Easter egg can be found in Naughty Dog's Uncharted series. The strange relic treasure found in each game resembles the Jak series' precursor orbs. The precursor text found on the top and bottom rows of the orbs reads out Naughty Dog and Madman when translated. Jak 1's precursor blockers have text on them too. When translated, they read out, "You are getting really dizzy." In Jak 2 and 3, there are signs throughout the game that read out the name Morgan. Morgan was the name of Jason Rubin's Black Labrador, who was a big part of the Naughty Dog atmosphere. She passed away at age 13 during Jak 2's development, and the game is in memory of her. In Jak 3's Freedom HQ, precursor text on the computer screens read out the lines, "Morgan, I miss you. I will always love you. There will never be another. 13 years hard time. Good dog." Morgan is still missed after a year has passed. There have been a few attempts at continuing the Jak series. The Lost Frontier was initially being worked on by a team at Naughty Dog for the PSP, while another team worked on the PS3. However, the transition from the PS2 to the then new systems wasn't a smooth one. Most of their time was spent learning the hardware and little progress was made. Many employees quit out of frustration, and it seemed like the company was on the verge of death. To keep the studio afloat, the two teams became one and handed over the Lost Frontier to another developer, putting their whole team to work on the first Uncharted game. This wasn't the last time they tried making a Jak game, though. The success of Uncharted 2 led the team to splitting into two once more. The new team was led by Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann, and they explored the idea of creating a new Jak and Daxter game, but the idea was ultimately dropped. Neil Druckmann had said, "We were questioning, are we doing this for marketing reasons and naming something Jak and Daxter when it's not really Jak and Daxter, or are we really passionate about it?" And the answer was, we felt it was more for marketing. We felt like we weren't doing service to what fans of this franchise really liked, even if the reinvented Daxter is pretty damn good looking. When they told their supervisors about the issue, they said they were allowed to tell whatever story they wanted, which led to The Last of Us being made. The Last of Us has a few cameos and references to Jak and Daxter in areas throughout the game. More concept art for Jak 4 was revealed in Naughty Dog's 30th anniversary art book, as well as in July of 2015, showing backgrounds, more ideas for Daxter, and a very photorealistic Jak. Did you know? Ratchet and Clank was Insomniac Games' first title released for the PS2, but it wasn't their first idea for the console. Shortly after parting ways with the Spyro series, Insomniac started work on an action-adventure RPG codenamed I-5, aka Girl with a Stick. The game took inspiration from both the Zelda and Tomb Raider series, but was cancelled after about a year of work for apparently not being that fun. This left the team with just a few months to create a new concept. They decided to make a game set in an alien galaxy centered around crazy weapons and gadgets, and thus, development on Ratchet and Clank began. When going through the designs for the main characters, their initial concepts were much different than the ones we know today. Ratchet started out as a reptilian-looking creature, barely resembling the final product aside from the pilot headgear and oversized hands. This original design was inspired by the grappling maneuver in Bionic Commando. Ratchet's design became more cat-like as time went by though. When shown the final design, Sony of Japan suggested Ratchet have stripes on his ears, to which the team was initially against. Insomniac CEO Ted Price even said they'd do it over my dead body, but they ended up liking the suggestion in the end. Clank's design took more time to finalize. One idea for the character was for him to be multiple robots, used to power up Ratchet's various gadgets and backpack. This, however, was deemed all too confusing for players to handle, and was a visual mess. Clank was later refined to simply be the backpack itself. Clank also got his large round eyes from an earlier design where he was a robotic lizard, which may have accompanied Ratchet's original reptilian design. Ratchet and Clank released in 2002 and was a huge success for Insomniac, paving the way for many more games down the road. And if there's one thing the series is known for, it's the clever usage of innuendos, especially in the game's titles. The innuendos didn't sit well with everyone, however, and all Ratchet and Clank games for the PS2 had their names changed for PAL regions. Going Commando, Up Your Arsenal, and Deadlocked were changed to Locked and Loaded, Ratchet and Clank 3, and Ratchet Gladiator respectively. All for One for the PS3 had the working titles Multiple Organisms, Bros Before Foes, and Friends with Benefits, out of a list of over 100 possible titles. Insomniac even thought about using the name Foreplay, but this name was changed as they didn't want to scare off parents from buying the game for their kids. Similarly, A Crack in Time was originally going to be titled Clock Blockers, but unsurprisingly, the name was also shot down. The latest game in the franchise, Into the Nexus, went under the working title Into the Nether Regions. Aside from double entendres, Ratchet and Clank is also known for its skill points. That said, the skill points didn't make their debut in the Ratchet series. They're actually a carryover from the Spyro games, specifically Spyro 2 and 3. The final skill point in the first Ratchet game is called Going Commando, which at the time of Ratchet and Clank's release may have been an allusion to the game's then in development sequel. Tools of Destruction has a skill point with the name No, Up Your Arsenal, referencing the name of the third Ratchet game. Other names for skill points include Gotta Catch 'Em All, referencing the Pokemon slogan, and You Can Break a Snow Dan, a reference to Insomniac Games employee Dan Johnson. As an inside joke of sorts, Insomniac has hidden away a reference to Dan in nearly every one of their games, beginning with Spyro 2. In the first Ratchet and Clank, Dan's face can be seen on the computer monitors in the landing area of the Blark station, and on Planet Poketaru, his face can be seen on every starfish on the beach. Most other Easter eggs of Dan in the Ratchet series are comprised of unlockable skins and his face on a snowman in Going Commando and Up Your Arsenal, jokingly dubbed the Snow Dan. Sadly, Dan passed away in 2006 during the development of Ratchet and Clank Size Matters, and it, along with Tools of Destruction, are dedicated to his memory. The Museum of Intergalactic History from Into the Nexus has a statue of Dan found off the beaten path, with its entry saying he made techno music, raised cats, and knew the secrets to enjoying life. Insomniac Games have made many good partners in the gaming industry, though arguably their closest relationship is with fellow PlayStation developer Naughty Dog. When the two companies worked on Crash Bandicoot and Spyro, they did so in the same building in the same room at Universal Studios, literally side by side. To this day, the developers make games very similar in gameplay style and aesthetic, and this is especially evident with Ratchet and Clank and Naughty Dog's own Jak and Daxter franchise. Both series have made several shoutouts to each other's games, especially during the PS2 era. Jak 2's Haven City has a billboard featuring Ratchet and Clank from Going Commando, and Going Commando has a poster of Jak and Daxter in Clank's apartment and a billboard in Algon City. Algon City even has a mission which, upon completing, has Clank mimic one of Daxter's victory animations from the first Jak and Daxter, accompanied with the same music track as well. In Jak X Combat Racing, Ratchet is an unlockable driver if save data for Ratchet Deadlocked is found on the PS2 memory card. Ratchet Deadlocked somewhat returns the favor by having having a Jak skin available for player 2 to use. Deadlocked also has a small shout out to Insomniac's time with Spyro the Dragon. The story of Deadlocked has Ratchet and Clank kidnapped and forced to partake in a series of death matches along with other kidnapped contestants throughout the galaxy. On the game's Rankometer leaderboard, the name Agent Zero can be seen, which is likely referencing the character of the same name from Spyro 2. By the end of Deadlocked, his status on the Rankometer is listed as active, implying that he managed to survive.
Did you know? Sly Cooper is said to be based on a character from Sucker Punch Studios' previous game, Rocket Robot on Wheels, which released on the Nintendo 64 in 1999. The game's antagonist was called Jojo, who, like Sly, is a hat-wearing raccoon. The character Whoopi Walrus may have also been the basis for Jim McSweeney from Sly 3, as both are large purple walruses. Sucker Punch pay homage to Rocket throughout the Sly series. During a cutscene in Sly Cooper and the Thievius Raccoonus, for instance, Murray can be seen wearing a hat based on Rocket's hub level, Whoopi World. In Sly 2, Band of Thieves, a gravestone can be found in the A Tangled Web episode that reads R.I.P. Rocket. Jojo can also be found at the end of the same level, floating above a crypt. The basic concept behind Sly Cooper was to make an action game where the main character was a thief. A thief proved to be a natural fit for an action platformer as it allowed Sucker Punch to make the types of risky terrain and dramatic situations a robber would find themselves in. Sly was designed to fit this mold, with the raccoon's banded eyes mirroring a burglar's mask. His original design was a lot stockier, more closely resembling an actual raccoon, but then Sly became lankier over time and his animations became more expressive as a result. Early builds of the game showed Sly standing up straight as he ran, which slowly developed into a sneakier crouch. Sly's cane was designed not as a hook, but as a question mark, giving him the air of a raccoon of mystery. It was also a hook planned to transform into different tools to aid Sly, such as a spray that could reveal hidden barriers. Sly was intended to make the player feel like a romanticized, idealized version of a thief. To reflect this, the team had a golden rule that they referenced when making decisions about the game's creative direction: whatever is thiefier wins. Checkpoints and coins originally used Sly's logo, however the team eventually decided against this, as it would feel less like the player was breaking into an enemy stronghold if there was Sly iconography littered about the stages. These coins were later changed to dancing green bills that resembled American dollars, but in the end these were dropped too. They were altered due to localization concerns. It was thought that dollars would be easily recognizable to American audiences, but less so in other parts of the world. Subsequent releases of the game also saw changes. The boss battle with Miss Ruby takes the form of a rhythm-based minigame. However, this boss is considerably more difficult in the Sly collection, as the music is remixed and out of sync with her actions. As work began on Sly 2, Sucker Punch decided upon a one-sentence project description that would inform the game's story and level design. This sentence was, "Sly and the gang worked together to pull off a big string of heists." The game took heavy inspiration from classic heist films like Ocean's 11 and The Italian Job, and to make it feel more like Sly's gang were working as a team, all three members became playable and were each given their own role in the capers. The game's levels were designed through a collaborative back and forth between the art department and the level designers. Architecture was used to guide the player through the level, so shots were set up to focus on architecture before any gameplay was designed. This way artists would know where to place important buildings and structures. The first level the team made took 8 months to complete. While the level didn't make it into the final game, it became the conceptual building block for the rest of Sly 2 stages. Little is known about this lost scenario, but it was said to have taken place in Monaco and would have seen Bentley crashing a stolen boat into a casino. In the Sly 3 level, Bloodbath Bay, there's a poster that says Dev and Karen wedding August 5th. This is a nod to two developers at Sucker Punch, Dev Maiden and Karen Yamagiwa Maiden, who got married during the creation of the game. Sly 3 was Sucker Punch's last entry into the series. The company wanted to be focused on a single project at a time, and the transition from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3 presented the perfect opportunity to transition into a new project. However, there's still evidence to suggest that Sucker Punch were once working on a fourth title, planned for release on the PS3. The game was reportedly planned to be shown at E3 2007 and was said to feature connectivity with a PSP Sly title, which was similarly ill-fated. Concept art exists for the PSP game, drawn by prolific comic and game artist Joe Madureira. The art showed Sly in different period costumes, suggesting the game was to have explored his ancestry, just like the eventually released Thieves in Time. The art also showed a shadowy, evil-looking version of Sly. The fourth installment ultimately found itself in the hands of Sanzaru Games, who were responsible for porting all the 3 original games to the PS3 in the Sly collection. Keeping this new game true to the original trilogy was a top priority for the fresh developers. They wanted the game to look exactly how a fan would imagine the series would look in HD. And speaking of fans, Sony asked the fans to design some of the treasures that Sly would find throughout the title. This was done in the form of a competition, and winning entries were included in the finished game. Concept art for Thieves in Time shows that Miss Decibel and Penelope weren't in the initial roster of bosses. In their place are a lizard and an elephant that appear to have been combined into Miss Decibel, and a mole with a large drill. Concept art also exists for a level set in ancient Egypt, and although the level itself was cut, the location was reused in the game's secret ending. The game also makes several allusions to other series. The treasure Lutrella Nevadensis is Daxter from Jak and Daxter, and Medieval Metal Man is Clank from Ratchet and Clank. Collecting all of the masks in the game will unlock Cole's amp weapon from Infamous, the series that Sucker Punch went on to develop. The achievements Ancient Warfare 3 and Navigate Like Drake are references to Modern Warfare 3 and Uncharted respectively. Inspector Carmelita Fox also shares similarities to the Batman character Renee Montoya. Both are strong-willed police women with Spanish names who have a complicated opinion of the protagonist. Carmelita's middle name is even Montoya, strengthening the connection. Renee Montoya was created for the 1990s cartoon series Batman the Animated Series, which was a source of inspiration for the Sly Cooper series. Carmelita is also shown to be a fan of Neil Diamond, a nod to the singer Neil Diamond. This may even be a reference to one of Diamond's songs, Carmelita's Eyes. In another musical reference, the Guru of the Stone takes a group of rock stars as his pupils at the end of Sly 3. The rock stars in question bring him unwanted media attention and heavily resemble the Beatles. This is referencing Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a meditation practitioner who became a guru to the Beatles.
Sony's latest releases have geared more towards cinematic experiences over tight, complex gameplay. While both might be included, it's clear that Sony have a keen interest in making their games resonate emotionally with their players. Back in the days of the original PlayStation, Sony published a shooter called Philosoma, which received international release. However, its sequel, which many in the West didn't know about, was left in Japan exclusively. The games differ dramatically, and the sequel certainly gears itself more towards Sony's cinematic endeavors. So, today, we'll be looking at Phase Paradox. For those who never played Philosoma, which is likely many of you, the game was released in 1995 in Japan and 96 in the West. It was developed by Epix Inc. and published by Sony. Epix are relatively unknown in the West, probably best known outside of Japan for creating Intelligent Cube and the Popo LaCroix series of RPGs. Philosoma was a typical space shooter, similar to Galaga and Gradius, though with a shifting perspective to provide variety throughout the game, such as shifting from a top-down shooter to a side-scroller and then to a rail shooter. The game's story revolves around recently colonized Planet 220. Reports indicate that the planet has undergone a devastating attack and is in need of assistance. The player takes control of a rookie pilot called D3 under the command of Officer Nicolas Michau, while they both attempt to save the planet from devastation. Phase Paradox is a continuation of Philosoma, which ends, spoiler alert, with the planet being destroyed. Despite being a direct sequel to the game, Phase Paradox plays completely differently. This time around, the game is presented in an adventure setting with minimal action having to be performed by the player. The game revolves around controlling 3 different characters as they traverse a spaceship in a similar gameplay style to Resident Evil, though without any of the puzzles or action segments you would expect from a survival horror. The game clearly concentrates far more on presenting a story, with the player mostly moving around a map between cutscenes, during which they will often be prompted to make one of 2 choices, using either the circle button or the X button. At times, decisions won't be clearly indicated as being wrong. It may be several events later that the consequences of an incorrect decision will come to light. No gunplay, no puzzles, but a whole lot of story. The story is split into chapters called phases, having the player alternate between each of the game's characters. Interestingly, each individual arc starts at different points in the title's narrative. The game follows the events on board the spaceship Gallant. The game opens with Planet 220 exploding. The Gallant suffers substantial damage from the blast, embedding a large object in the ship's hangar bay. 20% of the Gallant's crew has been wiped out during the incident. The player takes control of 3 members of the crew. Jude Sutcliffe, a member of a damage control unit who failed to become a pilot after experiencing an accident during training. Renee Hearn, a soldier who had been put on reserve during the Gallant's mission. And Isla Hoy-Bratton, a civilian who worked in the ship's biolab. After Planet 220's explosion, the crew of the Gallant has been left in disarray. Trying to establish what has happened, Jude's team is caught up in a secondary accident on the ship's transporter, after which their lieutenant goes missing, and most of the squad are killed. Both Jude and another member of his squad, Uma Remick, check the ship's security footage, only to find nobody on the ship. They also discover recorded footage of a medical unit, showing the staff in a panic firing at some unknown entity. Jude discovers Captain Nicola Michau, the commanding officer during the rescue mission executed on Planet 220, who seems to have been placed into a stasis pod. Soon after, while exploring the ship, Jude and Uma find a medical officer who informs them that a virus is spreading across the ship, and that several survivors seem to have gone mad and started attacking the crew. While much of the game is just cutscenes, it is still continuously possible throughout the story to make incorrect decisions, leading to a game over. This means that much of the player's progression will be based on their decision making. Though as there are only so many choices to make throughout the game which lead to a game over, the player must utilize the tried and tested method of trial and error to get through the bulk of the game. Each time the player is led to a game over, they have the option to return to the nearest checkpoint, replaying scenes, and potentially branching the story into a different direction. Because there is the possibility of a decision's consequences not coming into play until several other decisions after it have been made, this can send players back in the story by a fair amount. Even though the game is Japanese exclusive, all of the in-game voices are entirely in English, only having Japanese subtitles.
Roger, copy.
This does mean that during exploration segments, much of the displayed text will be Japanese. But as the story is primarily delivered through dialogue in cutscenes, players who only understand English can follow what is going on with relative ease. They just won't know what choices they are making. Phase Paradox was not developed by Epix Inc., the creators of Philosoma. Instead, Sony Interactive Entertainment were at the helm of development. The game was headed by Takahiro Matsushima, who also led development of Philosoma. The cinematic director, Tatsuya Ishiyama, was brought on, who would later work as a cutscene animator for Soul Calibur 4. Yoko Taro, known for his later works on the Drakengard or Nier series, worked as a visual and game designer for the project. Renee's voice was supplied by Mary Elizabeth McGlynn, who has not just worked as a voice actress on an extensive number of renowned productions and provided the vocals to the Silent Hill soundtrack, but who also acted as the voice director for Phase Paradox. Even non-playable characters in the game were given great attention to their performances, such as Uma Remick being voiced by Patricia Jia Lee, known for her work as Jill Valentine in both her motion capture and voice for Resident Evil 5. The voice of Lieutenant Lance Fuller was performed by Steve Kramer, who provided a variety of voices for a wide array of anime, TV, and video games over the years. The voice of Massimo Emerson is supplied by Jameson Price, who most recently supplied the announcer's voice for Mortal Kombat 11, as well as a ton of other games. Bob Buckles, the voice of Jude, has not just worked as a voice talent in an extensive number of anime, games, and TV, but has also been hired as a voice director for an even larger number of projects. It's clear, looking at this team, that Sony felt that this game would be an assured success, not knowing that the game would receive a mostly negative response for its gameplay, more so than any of the positives for its comparatively high-quality voice acting, graphics, and animation, with the exception of lip syncing.
Well, they weren't there a little while ago.
The game was first announced in January 2001, but only with extremely scarce details. It was confirmed that the title would release on the 22nd of March that year on 2 DVDs. The game ended up being demonstrated during the Tokyo Game Show in 2001, while also simultaneously being postponed to May 24th. Upon release, the title ended up being released on a single DVD rather than 2. By simply playing Phase Paradox, it is clear that the game was intended to reach a Western market. The characters have all been given high-quality voice actors for the English language exclusively, though this didn't stop the overall gameplay from being received negatively. The game was early in the PS2's life cycle, and in many ways serves well as a demonstration of the PlayStation 2's graphical capabilities and the market's move to cinematic storytelling. No official reason was given as to why Phase Paradox never received international localization. But, as the title was reviewed negatively, it's possible that Sony saw it as a risk to publish outside of Japan. Marketing the game as an interactive movie experience would have been a bold push in a market that, up to that point, had very much relied more on gameplay serving to entertain its audience. Over the years that would follow, gaming as a whole began to see more push into this market, now being considered a viable element of the industry, with the likes of David Cage's Heavy Rain and Detroit Become Human, or Supermassive's Until Dawn. In the end, Phase Paradox ended up being a struggle to write about, not because of the game itself, but rather that it seems to have left very little impact with the greater gaming community. And not much has been spoken of it outside of early Japanese promotional material. As home console graphics improved, horror games became more prevalent with developers. Now that they could show scary stuff with greater fidelity, it allowed them to spook their players with greater effect. Many horror games are, unsurprisingly, geared more towards adult audiences. However, today we'll be looking at a survival horror title which decided to take a change in direction for the genre, being created for younger gamers, based upon a CG anime series. That game is Gregory Horror Show. Gregory Horror Show was developed by Capcom and released for the PlayStation 2 in 2003 in both Europe and Japan. The game opens with the protagonist walking through a thick fog in a forest, with no memory of how they came to this strange place. They soon see a light through the haze, guiding them into a hotel called Gregory House. Upon arrival, the player is greeted by Gregory, a mouse in charge of the residence. Though the player changes their mind about staying and decides to leave, they are told, just like the Hotel California, this is impossible. After finding out the player's name and gender, Gregory allows them entrance and provides them with a room to stay in whilst at the hotel, Room 101. During the player's first night sleeping in the hotel, they are greeted by a vision of Death, the Grim Reaper, within a dream. Death informs the player that they have become trapped within Gregory House. In exchange for the player's help, he promises to set the player free if they are willing to collect 12 lost souls from Gregory's residence. The player wakes from their slumber to the sound of screams coming from the adjacent room. The room is occupied by Nico Zombie, who has been locked inside. They request to be set free, asking the player to obtain the room key from Gregory. After stealing the key, Nico Zombie provides the player with their first soul. As the game progresses, more and more residents begin to occupy the hotel, and we learn more about how the hotel operates, and the many mysteries surrounding Gregory, his family, and the occupants of the hotel. Gregory Horror Show plays from a third-person perspective, and has many similarities to some iterations of Capcom's Resident Evil series. The player has the choice of playing as either a male or female protagonist, who must navigate the halls of Gregory's haunted hotel, solving item-based puzzles, stealing residents' souls, and avoiding the player's continued lapse into insanity. Most of the residents of the hotel will attempt to avoid the player if they still have their soul. As it is the player's goal to steal these souls, they must work out how to do so, varying in execution with each different character. For example, the first resident met is the friendly Nico Zombie, a zombie cat who will help the player on their mission. Unfortunately though, they have been confined to their room. To obtain his soul, the player must first gain access to his room by waiting for Gregory to leave his post at the reception, stealing the room key, and spying on the cat to learn of their weakness of sweets. Nico Zombie then asks the player to tell them what their weakness is, before rewarding the correct answer with their soul. More and more guests begin to appear as more souls are collected, each with their own unique requirements for stealing their souls. Rather than having a typical health gauge, the player's health is determined by their state of mind. Mental health can be recovered by sleeping it off, reading books around the haunted hotel, or by using herbs. Again, in a similar vein to Capcom's other survival horror series, Resident Evil. If the player becomes too traumatized, the character will go insane, leading to them becoming a permanent resident of Gregory House. If a character has had their soul stolen already, they will continue their routine across the game's maps, and if they spot the player, will chase them down and cause mental stress, decreasing the player's mental state by forcing them to watch a horror show, a short animated FMV, changing depending on which character catches the player. After the player has witnessed a character's horror show, all guests will be randomly teleported around the hotel before they return to their regular scheduled positions. If a guest catches the player before they have handed the soul over to death, they will steal it back, forcing the player to obtain it again. Each of the game's different characters follow their own routines, based on the time of an in-game clock. By following characters and spying on them through keyholes, listening to what they're saying, a chime can be heard signifying that the player has unlocked a memo, giving the player a way of tracking each character's daily routines. As the player progresses, more characters begin to check in to the hotel, opening more resident rooms and other areas around Gregory House to explore. As more guests begin to try and hunt down the player, it becomes increasingly difficult to gather remaining souls. Additionally, guests begin to crop up who have a neutral reaction to the player, not necessarily causing harm, but simply annoyance, such as James, Gregory's grandson, who will follow the player and make a lot of noise, preventing the player from peeking through keyholes or entering certain areas. However, alongside this, neutral characters can be spoken with the possibility of providing hints on how to obtain souls from other guests. The player can be inflicted with several different status effects through different means. If the player doesn't go to sleep for over 8 in-game hours, they will fall into a state of tiredness. Though tiredness has no immediate effect, staying awake for an additional 2 hours will lead to a headache, causing the player's mental gauge to slowly deplete. After another 30 minutes, they will be inflicted with nervousness, causing healing items to be half as effective. Confusion will come into effect after being nervous for 15 minutes, scrambling the player's movements. Losing a soul to its original owner after a horror show will inflict melancholy, causing such extreme depression that they will no longer be able to run. The player can also suffer from darkness, making it harder to see far distances. Many of these conditions can be recovered through the use of status recovery items found throughout Gregory House, or by purchasing them in the Gregory Horror Shop. As there is no in-game currency to speak of, items must instead be traded for other items based on a 1 to 5 star ranking. Gregory Horror Show started its life as an anime, created by Naomi Owata, the same mind that would go on to create Pingu's latest Japanese original story, Pingu in the City. The original show already made use of CG for characters, making the process of replicating the visuals from the show into a game simple. With a total of 88 episodes, each running at only around 2 minutes apiece, the show ran for 4 seasons, each following different character arcs, mostly covering the bizarre nature of Gregory and his hotel. The series might have a very light-hearted appearance, but many of the stories followed themes of psychological turmoil, depression, and fear. The original 2 series of Gregory Horror Show almost looked like they belonged as cutscenes from a PlayStation 2 title, with the story being presented to the viewer as though they have arrived at Gregory House themselves, with characters speaking directly to the camera, similar to the first-person cutscene sequences featured in Gregory Horror Show's video game adaptation. After the game's release came a manga adaptation of the series called Gregory Horror Show Another World, created by Sanami Suzuki. Iwata also announced on his website in 2016 that a new series is currently in production, though at the time of this video, details have remained somewhat scarce since this initial announcement. The video game adaptation of the show includes a huge quantity of Easter eggs and further divulging of character backstories from the show, such as characters providing additional information about the world of Gregory Horror Show whilst they roam the halls. Some items from the show can also be found whilst exploring. Much of Gregory Horror Show's quirks are often left up to interpretation. remaining in the player's room can lead to voices being heard with either a criticizing or argumentative tone. It can be assumed that these voices come from the playable character's memories, perhaps suggesting the reason they ended up in the hotel to begin with. A Gregory Horror Show game was also released on mobile devices in 2018, called Gregory Horror Show Lost Qualia. The game has significant differences to the PlayStation 2 title, being more of a turn-based dungeon crawler RPG. The title has yet to receive any sort of English release or any sort of English promotion, so there's no idea as to whether this game will ever be localized outside of Japan. Gregory Horror Show was released in an interesting fashion. The show that it's based upon was mostly only recognized with Japanese audiences. With the European release, Capcom made the choice of releasing it at a discounted price, being only £20 at launch within the UK. While still in development in January 2003, IGN reported on the game, claiming that Capcom hoped to replicate Japanese interest in the series in North America, and that the game would be due out in the first quarter of 2004. Ultimately, the game released in August of 2003 in Japan and December in Europe. Upon the Japanese release of the game, IGN provided a hands-on article about their time with the title, suggesting that players wait for Capcom of America to assemble an English-language version. While an English-language release would come to fruition, an American release did not. In 2004, a user online posted what was Sony's alleged concept approval process, claiming that Sony Computer Entertainment of America would reject any 2D games and that gameplay plays little importance rather than graphics. It's possible, for this reasoning, that Gregory Horror Show was not given a chance with an American audience, being that the defined aesthetic of the series is that characters all appear as block-like and fairly rudimentary. This era saw many gamers raising issues with Sony's localization choices, with several games not seeing release simply because of their appearance. While this can't be confirmed as the exact reason the game never saw light in America, it certainly seems the most likely. Capcom had clearly already been working on the game with the assumption that an English localization would be published, and thus it was still released in Europe, where Sony Computer Entertainment of America would not be able to determine which titles would be allowed release. Reception of Gregory Horror Show was generally quite favorable. While many were disappointed by the game's lack of an extensive playtime, they praised the unique nature of the title and its charming yet disarming appearance. The Metal Slug series is known for a number of things: its spectacular pixel artwork and dedication to 2D gameplay, its fast-paced run-and-gun action, and of course, its humor. Created by SNK, a company most notable for its incredible use of sprite work in their games, Metal Slug is perhaps one of the most well-recognized arcade run-and-gun titles in history. However, the series wasn't without its spin-offs, one of which would distance itself in almost every known way from all previous Metal Slug titles. Today, we'll be looking at Metal Slug for the PlayStation 2. Released as simply Metal Slug, though fan-dubbed Metal Slug 3D in order to differentiate it from the first entry in the core series, the game was created by SNK Playmore and published in 2006 exclusively in Japan. As previously mentioned, unlike all previous Metal Slug titles, this time the game takes shape in 3D, and the game's plot takes a much more central role. Players take control of Marco Rossi, Tama Roving, Fio Germa, and Eri Kasamoto, as they attempt to thwart the plans of series antagonist General Morden. Having received word of a mid-sized detachment hidden in a mountain village a short distance from the government force's main base, Special Ops Unit Peregrine Falcons is sent in to investigate. The Peregrine Falcons HQ is raided by Morden's troops, made possible from an alliance between the dictator and the multimillionaire Ogma, the president of technology firm Ogma Enterprises. Our hero, Marco, must regroup with his team, defeat Morden, and uncover the truth behind Ogma's motives. Aside from the standard Metal Slug controls like jumping, shooting, and secondary weapons, many elements of Metal Slug are changed when the environment is put into 3D. As well as the player starting with 4 hit points, they must lock on to enemies in order to properly aim. The player can also swap between the various weapons and sub-weapons they find throughout the game. Though the pistol has unlimited ammo, the ammunition for all the other weapons is limited and is not replenished at the start of each level, and is instead carried over from the previous. Many of the series' staple weapons make reappearances, such as the shotgun, heavy machine gun, rocket launcher, enemy chaser, iron lizard, double machine gun, flame shot, the super grenade, which is essentially a rifle-mounted grenade launcher, and the laser gun, capable of shooting a powerful beam but with very limited ammo. There's even a unique weapon to the game, the sniper rifle, which, predictably, allows the player to scope. The player can also make use of a knife for close quarters combat with Marco and Tama, and the tonfa for Fio and Eri, allowing them to dodge and slide while locked onto an enemy. The player can also make use of grenades, including the standard frag grenade, molotovs, and smoke grenades, as well as stones and the monolith, with which the player throws out a beacon which calls down a massive stone tablet from the sky. This appears to be very similar to the attack used by the Mono Eye artifact in Metal Slug 3. As with other Metal Slug titles, within each level are prisoners of war, who are often hidden from the player. When rescued, they will provide the player with materials, health, or ammunition. Likely in an attempt to shift the game away from its arcade roots and follow more closely to a traditional console release, each of the characters can be upgraded and customized. Player performance is rated at the end of each level based on score and completion time, as well as a bonus from saving prisoners. Though if the player dies at any point in the level, they lose the bonus for any prisoners rescued prior to the death. For every S rank the player achieves throughout the game, the stats of the character are increased. There are 4 different stats, with each character specializing in one, that will be full from the very start of the game. Marco starts with full hit rate, determining the character's overall accuracy and range of their weapons. Fio is focused on power. As expected, this stat increases the amount of damage done by the player's attacks. Tama starts the game with full machine, which increases the mobility of their vehicles, and Eri begins with full pellet. Pellet determines the amount of splash damage from the player's attacks, increasing the weapon's radius the higher the stat. There are also a number of additional upgrades that can be purchased. When playing through the game, the player earns skill points to spend. The higher the difficulty, the more of these points the player will acquire. The 4 upgrades available increase the range of the lock-on ability, increase the speed at which the player can throw grenades, improve luck to decrease enemy accuracy, as well as one for simply boosting maximum HP. When playing through the game, the player collects materials which in turn can be used in the laboratory to create new customization options and upgrades for the titular Metal Slug. The core, the treads, the main cannon, the secondary weapon, the Vulcan, armor, and camouflage can all be changed. Each level is split up into multiple stages, with the final stage of each one ending in a boss fight. Several levels in the game change the perspective entirely and take the form of an on-rail shooter instead. These have the player flying in a jet or underwater in a submarine. After completion of the game, an extra minigame can be unlocked which puts the player in control of a prisoner of war. They are unable to attack and must escape from a compound whilst not being spotted by the enemy. The game was first unveiled at the Tokyo Game Show in 2004, being announced without a definite title having been decided. At E3 the following year, SNK announced that the game would be called Metal Slug Evolution, though the Evolution subtitle was later dropped. Metal Slug's first venture into 3D would, unsurprisingly, require additional staff to manage, with many of the original artists for the series having only worked exclusively in 2D. That said, Metal Slug 3D was created by a team without any of the series' original developers. The choice of moving the series into 3D was made by then SNK Director of Games, and later SNK Playmore President, Soichiro Hosoya, as he believed that for a game publisher to survive, they must move into 3D development. He said, "As a games developer, we won't be able to survive without 3D titles. We also understand that the US and European markets, respectively their gamers, want 3D titles. Titles need not only be directed towards the world market, but also have to develop towards 3D, as games publishers won't be able to survive otherwise." This led to the creation of King of Fighters Maximum Impact, the first of SNK's 3D titles. It seemed like only a natural progression for Metal Slug to make a similar move, being one of the more popular series for Western audiences, and Hosoya's statement that US and European markets prefer 3D titles. Rumors have often spread that the game wasn't always intended to be exclusively released in Japan. The game has full English voice acting.
Major Rossi! It's me!
And many of the game's menus are already written in English. There were allegedly plans for a North American release under the name Metal Slug 2006, as well that it would be published in Europe as Metal Slug 3D by Ignition Entertainment, the publisher of many Metal Slug titles. Ultimately, it's likely that SNK decided against the decision to release the game internationally after the title received extensive criticism before it had even been released in Japan. Many fans of the series expressed their distaste for the title online, even with just the very idea of Metal Slug being made in 3D. With that said, Famitsu actually reviewed the game positively, giving it a solid flush of 7s after it had been released, and many comments online said that it wasn't as bad as they had initially expected following pre-release speculation. Being released in 2006, the PlayStation 2 was beginning to make way for the soon-to-be-released PlayStation 3. This was factored into the decision, as when asked what the fate of the game was for the West, Hosoya had stated, "Metal Slug 3D though, I can tell you, will only be released in Japan. We're doing this as it will be a PS2 title. Regarding the US European market, we want to re-release Metal Slug 3D on next-generation consoles. As Metal Slug 3D is a strategically important title for the US European market, we don't want to release a half-finished product. King of Fighters Maximum Impact and Metal Slug 3D are two of our main pillars with which we want to tailor to their wishes the 3D. The game was released as a way to celebrate Metal Slug's 10th anniversary, though because of the poor reception, the company put together and released Metal Slug Anthology internationally instead, a compilation containing Metal Slug 1 through 6 and Metal Slug X.
Capcom, Namco, two of the biggest names in video game development, both have been around since the golden era of arcade games. Known for creating games where their characters cross over, the two companies have a history of not only cooperation, but also competition. The first title in which both teams joined forces never made it to the West. Featuring a huge number of characters from both companies, that game is Namco Cross Capcom. Developed by Monolith Soft, a subsidiary of Namco at the time, and published in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, Namco Cross Capcom is a different take on the strategy RPG genre. To add in mechanics that both companies are known for, the game features a fighting side to it. Attacking enemies requires moving a unit into a position where they can reach the enemy. You are then able to initiate a fighting style attack phase. This allows players to attack the enemy with a variety of different moves by using the directional and circle buttons. You're given a limited number of attacks during this phase, and must attempt to do as much damage as possible. Different attacks are stronger against some enemies compared to others. This is demonstrated through a menu prior to attacking the enemy that will tell you their weak points. The game rewards clever use of attacks to combo and air juggle, providing you with bonuses like additional attacks, stat boosts, and damage modifiers. Performing all 5 different attacks during a battle will restore some of the unit's HP or MP too. By building up enough attacks and filling a power gauge for your character, it's also possible to perform a strong special attack. Some units are able to perform special moves when 2 characters have an affinity for each other. For example, while some units move around as a pair, some are standalone characters that can be moved around on their own. Ryu and Ken are standalone units, but if both are close enough together, they'll be able to team up for an attack that delivers even greater damage. When it comes to an enemy unit attacking you, there are a few different defensive options. The normal option requires you to counter enemy moves by pressing directional buttons as they appear on screen. Successfully doing this will reward you with bonus AP and will make your character's turn come quicker. You can even use some AP to absorb a portion of the damage dealt. There's also an option which will use up some of the character's special attack gauge in order to simply skip the fight and take the damage instead. Some characters have their own moves too, allowing them to counter attacks by using up some of the points from the power gauge. As you can see, the game is very basic, but the main appeal of the title comes out of seeing beloved characters from your favorite series and how they'll crop up. Characters will know of each other, and common elements from each franchise will overlap to create a fully connected universe. This is done through dialogue, visual references, and elements you might not expect. This encourages players to explore character affinities and discover their multiple assault attacks. The game's plot follows the characters of Reiji Alisu and Zhao Mu in the year 20XX. The duo are tasked to investigate spiritual disturbances for a special underground organization called Shinra. During the investigation, they discover quakes that are causing rifts to open between worlds, a disturbance that occurred 10 years prior. These quakes cause several different worlds to connect and transport people between them. Heroes from all walks of gaming life are bundled together in your party, some from the biggest names in gaming and some from the smallest. The same is said for the villains of these games too, who are working cooperatively against you. A common complaint from reviewers was that fights became tedious after a few hours of playing and can distract from the plot. Maps can often take over half an hour to complete, and there are a total of 50 throughout the game. Regarding how the game came into creation, Namco executive Yoichi Haraguchi stated prior to the game's release, "Monolith Soft came to us saying that they wanted to make a game that featured characters from Namco. Our company is celebrating its 50th anniversary in June, so we were thinking that it would be great to bring back our characters from the past." The game had been a concept for 2 years until Namco came up with the idea of bringing in characters from another company. When thinking of developers that they could work with, the only company Namco could think of with enough unique characters to match their own was Capcom. Keiji Inafune, who worked on the Onimusha and Mega Man Legends series for Capcom at the time, was extremely excited to see the game come to life. He stated, "If it were a few years back, it would have been unthinkable to join hands with another rival company in the industry, but companies nowadays are more cooperative, and I think that it's a good thing for the video game industry. I hope that we can collaborate together with Namco again in the future." Namco Cross Capcom led to several titles between both companies being released internationally. After this title came Cross Edge, an RPG released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2008. The game was a collaboration between Namco, Capcom, Nippon Ichi, and Gust. The two companies decided to then step away from RPGs and went for a genre they're both well known for, a fighting game that crossed over Street Fighter and Tekken. Following that was the 3DS RPG Project Cross Zone, where not only are Namco and Capcom characters fighting together, but Sega is thrown into the mix too. With the sequel Project Cross Zone 2 being released, we also saw the introduction of Chrom and Lucina from Fire Emblem Awakening joining the cast of playable characters, as well as Metal Face from Xenoblade Chronicles appearing as a rival. This meant that the game contained characters from not only Namco and Capcom, but Sega and Nintendo as well. We were unable to find an official statement on Namco Cross Capcom's lack of localization. Online sources cite different reasons, and we weren't able to confirm any of these. Some say that there were disputes between Namco and Capcom about who would be given the right to publish the game in the Western markets. Others believe that Namco didn't want to translate and publish the title outside of Japan because of the obscurity of many of the characters that appear within the game. A lot of the characters come from some very obscure titles that were also Japan exclusive. However, the characters of Reiji and Zhao Mu did prove popular enough with Namco for them to be reused in later games. A fan translation patch was created by the group Transgen. It translates a vast majority of the game into English, enough to push through the game's story and to get a handle of the battle system. Many believe the translation demonstrates the ability and determination of fans. While it might not be a perfect translation and has a few minor spelling mistakes slipping in, it is still an admirable effort and one that should be seen as an inspiration.
There's certainly a large number of absurd or bizarre games to come from the minds of Japanese game developers, and it seems to us that many of those creations saw prevalence with the release of Sony's PlayStation 2. From the likes of Katamari Damacy's hectic, colourful imaginings, to a game allowing us to experience life as Mr. Mosquito. The console seemed to be open doors to absurdist humour and imaginative gameplay mechanics. Today we'll be looking at two games by the same developer, both left in Japan and both published by Sony themselves. The development studio Albion had somewhat humble beginnings, with little fanfare for their first few releases. After the release of their two PS2 titles, the companies would work on games such as Malicious, Siren Blood Curse, and Ape Escape Academy. The two games we'll be looking at for this episode will be Poiny's Poin and Chain Dive, starting with Poiny. Poiny's Poin was released in 2002, putting the player into the role of Poiny, a strange creature who lives in a lively place known as Jellytown. Poiny manages to become separated from his mother when he meets a young girl by the name of Lilin-chan. Lilin tells Poiny that she will help him find his way home, but instead asks a favour of him, to use the various orbs around Jellytown, known as Poin, to solve a series of strange incidents which are occurring, in order to return the town to its once peaceful state. Lilin provides Poiny with a living Poin, simply referred to as Poin, a toxic-tongued duck-like creature who protrudes from Poiny's backside. Poiny is special and one of the few able to make use of Poins because, as Lilin describes it,
Poins can only be used by the pure and, stupid at heart.
Pointy is pit against a vindictive young girl called Lolo, who controls an army of cat-like creatures called Hellnyaos. These creatures are able to create toxic points, which corrupt whomever they are used upon, causing them to become erratically confused and violent. Pointy's Point plays like many typical 3D platformers, with the player navigating large areas and solving puzzles. Most puzzles involve the use of points to control NPCs' emotions. By grabbing a point, the player is able to throw it at any living creature and alter its state of mind. Blue points will cause the target to be overwrought with sadness. Red points will invoke anger, and yellow points will make characters happy. While these different colors can be used as they come, should the player need to solve a puzzle with a color not present, they may be able to combine two different points to create the remaining third color. Combining two points of the same color will simply cause them to disappear. Eventually, a character's emotions will resolve themselves, or the player can use a point of the same color as their emotion to erase the effect. This is how the effects of the toxic points can be reversed. Points also serve other functions beside their mood-altering capabilities, such as being used as platforms. Pointy is also able to grab points and use them to float over large distances. By manipulating the emotions of various characters in the world, Pointy is able to solve a variety of puzzles, such as causing characters to become angry enough to damage their surroundings, opening new paths. A variety of creatures inhabit the world of Jellytown, including living eclairs. By grabbing these creatures, it's possible to recover health. There are also purple eclairs, which instead will reduce Pointy's health, and golden eclairs, which are hidden and when eaten will increase the player's maximum health. There are also large eclairs, which fully restore Pointy's health without being eaten. Pointy's main goal is to free various people around town from the effects of the poisonous points, and by helping them, they will help Pointy on his journey to reunite with his mother. Not much has been written about the game online, or information is just generally quite scarce, but an interesting point from our playthroughs is how it asks the player's age at the beginning of the game. Having played through twice at two different ages, we couldn't discern any differences. Pointy's Point may have never released in any English territories, but it does contain not just fully English text translation, but also has complete English voice acting alongside Japanese.
Come over tonight and let's boogie down and party!
The game did allegedly receive a release in China, with English being used as the primary language of the game in the region. The game's voice acting may be familiar to an English-speaking audience. The game's English voice acting was actually supervised by Christian Storms, the supervisor for the first 3 seasons of South Park's Japanese dub. Most notably, many have pointed out the similarities between the voice of Pointy's duck character and Eric Cartman from South Park.
Hey Green, do you like eclairs?
I made you eat your parents.
Christian Storms has also worked in Japan for a long time, assisting with many Japan-related TV shows, as well as subtitling over 70 Japanese feature films into English. One character in the game, a dazzling hero from TV, is named Bon Jovi. As you may have guessed, this is an obvious reference to the famed American rock group Bon Jovi. Pointy also has a habit of celebrating by claiming that
You can't touch this!
a popular phrase coined by MC Hammer with his hit song,
You can't touch this.
Next up, a move into a more mature realm of PlayStation 2 games, Chain Dive. Chain Dive was released in 2003, putting the player in the role of Shark, a mysterious man with an almighty biomechanical suit. He fights to protect the people and princesses living on the planet Elm after menacing invaders do what they do best and start invading. Shark appears just as the planet is on the brink of collapse. He is aided by his arsenal, a sword called the Unbreakable and a grappling hook called a Plasma Chain. The game plays across a 2D axis while being rendered in 3D. The player's main capabilities lie in being able to swing from various green orbs found throughout stages, allowing them to effectively slingshot themselves, picking up momentum and propelling at high speeds across environments assisted by their double jump. The player can also hang from points and swing around them. Most stages have an abundance of orbs that can be latched onto, however, at times this proves to be a part of the game's main challenge. Orbs can be placed in an inconsistent manner, leaving the player falling in hopes of a grapple point to get back into the fast-paced aerial assault, or having to utilize frozen foes in order to ascend higher. Unbreakable isn't actually able to directly damage enemies. Instead, it will freeze the enemy into a giant block of ice, turning them into their own grapple point. By swinging through the enemy, they will be defeated. Some enemies require multiple hits or higher speeds in order to destroy them. By swinging through multiple enemies in quick succession, the player can build up a combo score in order to recover health, with better performances recovering more. The player is able to run out of stamina on their main attack, however. When the gauge is fully depleted, they are unable to freeze enemies with the Unbreakable and will have to wait for a cooldown period. Shark can also make use of a special attack which freezes all enemies on screen. All enemies will remain frozen until the combo is broken. This attack can be risky, however, as the player must sacrifice a significant portion of their health to activate it. Shark can also save various damsels by picking them up and carrying them to safety, though while they are being carried, the player is unable to attack and must place them down before engaging enemies. Levels have different goals rather than sticking to the same task throughout. These can range from navigating to the end of a stage like a typical platformer, protecting NPCs in escort missions, and even runner stages. There are also large boss battles throughout the game. Each stage ends with a rating for the player based on enemy, damage, time, combo, and rescue when applicable. Each of the relatively short stages is bookended with very long, dialogue-heavy, story-based cutscenes. Environments might appear fairly empty by many other PlayStation 2 game standards, but this was an intentional choice by the developer to ensure that the title runs at a solid 60 frames per second throughout, with varying degrees of success. As much of the game relies on its fast-paced movement, the game was also visually optimized for motion. The environments that the player is put through also range dramatically in presentation, from dark derelict cities to floating ruins in blue skies. While the game is relatively short, with the player being able to reach the end within just a few hours, there are 2 additional modes that are unlocked after completion: time trials and combo trials. Albion aren't particularly well known for their self-headed projects, having only created a small handful of their own games. This isn't to say that Albion doesn't have a strong connection to the industry. The company has been contracted on a number of high-profile games as a development support team for several major studios, including Platinum Games, Sony, and Nintendo. Seeing the fast-paced action of Chain Dive, it's almost no wonder that Albion would later be tasked with helping Platinum Games create Bayonetta and Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. With regards to Pointy's Point, however, Sony may have been reluctant to publish the game anywhere but Japan simply because of the game's content. People online liken the tone of the game's dialogue to a more friendly Conker's Bad Fur Day. Within the first 10 minutes of the game, we are already introduced to a flirtatious duck who refers to the young protagonist as a wet ass. The contrasting tones would have probably been contentious in a Western market. Topping that, the game was reviewed as a fairly mixed bag, many praising the title's interesting premise of manipulating emotions to solve puzzles, but finding issue with its short playtime and general unpolished nature. For Chain Dive, while the game was praised and received a lot of recognition through word of mouth, it was ultimately similar to Pointy's Point in its short playtime. While these titles may be fun to revisit in today's age, at the time, Sony had a considerable number of games on the platform which had larger scopes than we had ever seen before. Both games could have stood out had they appeared on earlier hardware, mainly concentrating on their mechanics over length, but with the PlayStation 2's significant boost in disk storage space, expectations were higher.
Did you also know that Pokemon Yellow's Safari Zone has a small secret not found in any other version of Gen 1? Or that Splatoon has a secret Easter egg referencing Tupac and Biggie Smalls? Click the video on screen for an entire hour of Nintendo facts just like these.